During the winter season, two individuals sit in a dimly lit restaurant, discussing the circulating rumors about a madman who keeps appearing on war-torn battlefields. This so-called madman is merely a mercenary, yet he fights like a man who has no regard for his own life. After each battle ends, he reportedly vanishes, only to reappear in another conflict, as if chasing death itself. One of the men finds this behavior odd. Most mercenaries value their lives, he says. But this one, he always walks away muttering, "I survived another battlefield." What's most intriguing is the pattern. Whenever there's a war against the Empire, this mercenary is guaranteed to show up. Some whisper that he's not in it for money, but for revenge. Chilled by the tale, the other man shudders. "Do we know who he is?" "No one's certain," comes the reply. "But there are rumors. They say he was once a prince of a fallen kingdom, now looking for a place to die." The scene shifts. Elsewhere, in a quiet, desolate area, a wounded man leans against a large stone. Before him stands an armored figure. The armored man removes his helmet, revealing his face as he speaks. So, in the end, the third prince of Betrayal, Betrayal, has come to rely on self-taught methods. His name, once noble, is now synonymous with disgrace, the very man blamed for bringing ruin to his kingdom. Nearly a decade earlier, Yuri arrived late to a secret meeting. A woman with golden hair stood waiting. Yuri approached her apologetically. "I'm sorry I'm late. My father called me in for an emergency meeting. I sent word through the messenger." She said nothing. "I know I'm always like this," Yuri continued, "but please forgive me. Just this once." The woman was none other than Princess Katerina Ivarna Grandzine, heir to the Empire. After a pause, she finally spoke. "Do you really think you're the only one who's busy? I had to sneak all the way here while dodging guards, nobles, and attention." "I know," Yuri said softly. "I know, but you must understand. I have to be cautious. My father is preparing to leave the throne soon." Then, after a moment of silence, he added with regret, "Maybe I shouldn't have told anyone that." Hearing herself referred to as just one of the others enraged Katerina. Her eyes blazed with fury as she threw the necklace Yuri had once given her. "Then why did you give this to me if you don't even trust me?" she demanded. "Give it to a woman you can trust." With that, she turned away, her voice cold as ice. "Don't contact me until I reach out first." Yuri shouted after her, begging her to stop, but she never looked back. After she was gone, Yuri stood in silence, lost in turmoil. What should I do now? He wondered. Winning her forgiveness would be nearly impossible. As he muttered to himself in the shadows of his thoughts, an unknown figure observed him from afar, hidden in the darkness. The man chuckled quietly before disappearing. From that day forward, the already fragile relationship between Betrayal and the Empire completely collapsed. The Empire escalated from petty provocations to outright violations of treaties. Tensions boiled over, and war was no longer a question of if, but when. The day finally arrived. The Empire launched a full-scale invasion of Betrayal. The royal castle was engulfed in flames, and the battlefield, soldiers died by the dozens. Civilians and guards scrambled to evacuate, shouting warnings to anyone near the castle to flee. Yuri arrived at the castle's gates only to find it consumed by fire. The war had truly begun. Time seemed to stand still. Endless sacrifices followed. Still alive and fighting, Yuri pressed on, driven by the weight of his fallen kingdom. In the thick of battle, he turned to a fellow soldier named Joshua. "Where are the reinforcements?" he demanded. But things had changed. The man once hailed as the strongest warrior on the continent, Betrayal's greatest weapon, King Fury Betrayal, Yuri's father, had vanished. Without him, the tide of war turned sharply in the Empire's favor. At first, Yuri tried to dismiss the timing as coincidence. Deep down, though, he was denying an ugly truth. But after countless battles and brushes with death, Yuri could no longer ignore it. He came to a grim conclusion. Katerina had betrayed him. He had only ever told one person about his father's plans and departure, and that person was Katerina. As soon as his father left Betrayal, the Empire launched its invasion. Desperate for hope, Yuri tried to convince himself it was all in his head. He sent her a message via pigeon. Her reply? A simple apology. Nothing else. And that crushed whatever hope Yuri had left. Back on the battlefield, the enemy identified him. "It's the third prince," someone shouted. "Take him down," and Betrayal falls with him. They charged toward him. Rage and despair overtook Yuri as he fought. He took down one enemy, then blocked another strike. Again and again, he fought until his strength began to fade. The enemies kept coming. An entire unit now rushed toward him. Realizing his survival was unlikely, Yuri found himself wondering, "Is this where I die?" An enemy soldier lunged. Yuri raised his sword, but it was too late. He couldn't react in time. Suddenly, a soldier named Laurent threw himself into the path of the blow, taking the hit meant for Yuri. Collapsing to the ground, Laurent used his final breath to whisper, "Run. You must survive, Prince Yuri." Yuri tried to reach him, but others held him back, shielding him as they fended off the enemy. "You must retreat," one of the soldiers shouted. "If something happens to you, Betrayal is finished." They pushed him away, forcing him to flee. Yuri ran. Enemy shouts followed him. Some gave chase, but he managed to outpace them and slipped into an old warehouse. There, he crouched behind stacked crates, breathing heavily. The sounds of soldiers searching nearby echoed through the walls. As he sat there, he knew he couldn't hide forever. He had to act. What now? He asked himself. Where's father? He feared the answer. If the king hadn't returned by now, then he was likely dead. Suddenly, the warehouse door creaked open. Yuri's heart pounded as a soldier stepped inside and spotted him. The man began walking toward him. In that moment, Yuri realized something. He didn't want to die. Not yet. He fell to his knees and begged, "Please, let me live. Betrayal has no future if I die here." In his mind, Yuri saw the faces of those who had sacrificed themselves for him. His knights, his comrades, his people. He had to survive. For them. The soldier bowed his head slightly and said, "One day, the Empire will pay for its sins." Then, with urgency in his voice, he informed Yuri that enemy forces would arrive soon and urged him to flee. Yuri turned and ran into the forest, a single resolution burning in his heart: to survive at all costs, to rebuild Betrayal, and to take revenge on the Empire. But that resolve, he would soon realize, was nothing more than a child's fantasy. Reality was far crueler. In the end, everyone in Betrayal died. That devastating truth made Yuri question everything. What was the point of this attack? He wondered bitterly. The final shred of hope he had clung to, Katerina, had shattered. With nothing left to hold on to, Yuri gave in to despair and dedicated himself to vengeance. Clutching his mother's necklace, he imagined that someday, someone would appear and finally put him out of his misery. And so, Yuri began seeking out death. He charged into battle after battle, desperately chasing an end. In the present moment, clad in his war-worn armor, Yuri stood once again on a battlefield. Across from him, another armored soldier let out a cruel laugh. "So this is what you've become," he sneered. "Throwing yourself into every dangerous fight, just to escape your guilt." The armored man looked down on Yuri with contempt. "You don't even deserve a peaceful death." Yuri didn't recognize him, but his expression shifted when the armored man calmly said, "Yuri Betrayal, the third prince of the fallen kingdom." Yuri froze. Shock washed over him. No one should know who he was. Everyone who had known his true identity was supposed to be dead. The armored man stepped forward. "Everything that happened in Betrayal was your fault." Then, without another word, he removed his helmet. Yuri's eyes widened in disbelief. It was Laurent, the soldier who had once thrown himself in harm's way to protect him. The man Yuri had believed had died on the battlefield now stood alive before him. Laurent drew his sword. "You destroyed everything. Because of you, the Betrayal kingdom fell. Because of you, the Flandret household's honor and its sacred oath, my family's legacy, were shattered in an instant. You ruined my faith, my pride, and my name." Yuri could hardly breathe. He stared at Laurent, unable to form words. He shouldn't be alive. And yet, here he was, like a ghost risen to pass judgment. Yuri dropped to his knees, accepting the accusation. He didn't fight back. Then Laurent struck at Yuri with his sword and take him down. Yuri expected to feel peace, release. But instead, guilt swelled within his chest, heavier than ever. Just as darkness began to overtake him, the necklace in his hand began to glow. In that final moment, he heard his father's voice in his mind. A true heir of Betrayal never abandons their honor, no matter what happens. Everything faded. Then, suddenly, Yuri opened his eyes. He was a child again. Someone was calling Yuri. He had been asleep for 3 whole days. As his vision slowly adjusted, He realized the voice belonged to his father, the king of Betrayal. His father gently asked if he was all right. Yuri, still dazed, sat up on the bed, stunned to see his father in front of him. How could this be? His father was supposed to be dead. As confusion washed over him, Yuri began to believe his father must have ended up in hell as well. Yuri could accept that he deserved damnation, but his father? That didn't feel right. The king looked at his son, clearly perplexed by his ramblings. But before he could respond, Yuri reached out, grabbed his hand, and said with a wistful expression, "It all makes sense now. You always preached about honor." His father's face darkened with irritation. Without warning, he slapped Yuri across the face, snapping him out of his spiral. Tears welled in Yuri's eyes. "Even in hell, you still haven't kicked your habit of hitting me," he muttered, then added half-jokingly, "You should repent. It's not too late." As Yuri spoke, a soft breeze drifted in, carrying a lone leaf through the window. He turned toward it and froze. Outside, there were no flames, no screams, no demons. There was no hell, just a peaceful palace bathed in sunlight. Maids were laughing as they carried out their daily tasks. Yuri's gaze drifted to his father and two brothers. Panic swelled in his chest, and then everything went black again. His collapse shocked everyone in the room. The maids rushed to his aid, frantic and confused. When he regained consciousness again, Yuri realized something unthinkable. He was 13 years old. At first, he thought it was a dream, or perhaps a long and vivid déjà vu. But no matter how many times he tried to wake up, the dream never ended. Instead, memories long buried began to replay in exact detail. Eventually, Yuri had no choice but to accept the impossible. He had returned to the past. Now seated at the dining table with his family, Yuri stared in awe at familiar faces. It was the spring of the year he turned 13, the beginning of everything, the beginning of the end. And somehow, he had been given one more chance. The next morning, Yuri was still in bed when his maid entered and drew the curtains. "Wake up, young master," she called cheerfully. "You instructed me to wake you early today." Yuri remained motionless until she added, "You'll be late for your sword training." In an instant, he shot up from bed, fully awake. He quickly instructed the maid, Aina, to prepare his clothes, but then paused, remembering he needed to bathe first. Aina, a beautiful brown-haired maid, gave him a small smile. "Calm down, young master. Let's start with washing your face." Yuri froze. In his mind, an image surfaced. Aina had also died in that attack by the Empire. That horrible vision silenced him. Moments later, he spoke again. "Aina, slap me." Aina blinked, stunned. "Why, young master? Are you telling me to commit treason?" Yuri smiled faintly. "No, I'm ordering you. As a noble." Aina hesitated. "Are you sure?" Yuri nodded. "I'm a noble. I won't take back my words." Before he could say another word, Aina slapped him. A sharp, echoing sound that rang through the entire castle. The scene shifted to the training grounds. Yuri was practicing swordsmanship with another student, his cheeks still red from Aina's slap. He had forgotten how strong she was. Yet despite the mark on the third prince's face, no one offered him ointment. Not even the instructor training him said a word. Yuri wasn't pleased. Their sword instructor, Bernard, didn't correct his form. He simply made Yuri spar, fulfilling the day's training quota without much interest. Yuri found it odd. Why does Bernard only focus on sparring? Isn't swordsmanship more than that? Yuri remembered how, in his past life, Bernard had once told the king that Yuri had talent, real talent. But he also said that Yuri wasted it. If the third prince had just been a little more diligent, Bernard had once remarked, he could have become Briol's greatest blessing. Now, with all the weight of his past and the second chance in his hands, Yuri wasn't going to waste it this time. At that time, Yuri had overheard their conversation, and that was when Bernard stopped paying him much attention. Since Yuri had been uncooperative during training, Bernard reduced their sessions to mere sparring. Looking back, Yuri realized he had made a critical mistake. Even after hearing those harsh words, instead of working harder, he had only grown lazier. Now, in the present training session, Yuri raised his sword and pointed it at Bernard. His voice was clear and resolute. "Teach me swordsmanship properly. From now on, I'll give it everything I have." Bernard studied him for a moment. Though he didn't understand what had come over Yuri, he could sense the sincerity in his voice. Without a word, Bernard took a stance. A faint blue aura shimmered along his blade. "Very well," he said. "From this moment on, Unrivaled training begins. Without warning, Bernard charged. Yuri managed to block the attack and quickly shouted, "Wait!" Bernard stepped back, giving him a moment. Yuri reset his stance, but his heart pounded with fear. I forgot, he thought. Before joining Betrayal, Bernard was once called the Sword Demon. The training resumed, and by the time it ended, Yuri collapsed onto the ground, throwing his sword aside and gasping for breath. His entire body ached. So this is what it feels like to train under the real Sword Demon. Yuri was exhausted. If he hadn't retained his experience from his mercenary life, he was certain he would have been completely overwhelmed. Lying on the grass, he raised a trembling hand toward the sky, breathing heavily. It's exhausting, but if I keep training like this, I'll improve fast. I'm sure of it. Despite his fatigue, Yuri felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Meanwhile, Bernard stood silently nearby, surprised. He blocked all of my attacks. When did he get this good? Bernard wondered. Something about Yuri had changed, and it wasn't just his skill. As Yuri continued to rest, Aina came running toward him in a panic. "Young master, please stop the training and come quickly. Your father is asking for you." Yuri sat up, confused. "What's going on?" Aina caught her breath and explained. "Count Johannes has arrived. He brought his son with him." The name struck Yuri like lightning. Got Barkvar. Fury surged through him. In his previous life, Got was the one who betrayed the kingdom, opening the gates to the Empire and leading to Betrayal's fall. Yuri clenched his fists and asked, "Where is that guy?" The scene shifts to the dining table, where Yuri's father, elder brother, Count Johannes, and his sons are gathered for a meal. As they eat, Count Johannes compliments Yuri's sudden change in behavior. Not only that, he notes, Yuri's physique also appears much stronger and more refined than before. Chuckling, Yuri's father replies, "It seems my son must have eaten something strange." Count Johannes laughs heartily and jokes, "Then I'd like to feed my son the same thing." Yuri's father then offers a compliment to Count Johannes' son, praising him for being intelligent and well-mannered. Pleased by the praise, Count Johannes humbly admits, he still has a lot to learn, but I appreciate the kind words. Barkvar, Count Johannes' son, sits quietly. His expression is serious, but when he looks at Yuri's elder brother, his face brightens. It's clear he holds admiration for him. However, when Barkvar glances at Yuri, he is met with a sharp, intimidating stare. Yuri's eyes are filled with barely contained aggression, and Barkvar begins to sweat nervously under the intensity of it. Yuri's elder brother leans in and whispers, "You and Barkvar, not on good terms?" Yuri nods slightly and whispers back, "He betrayed me." With a mischievous smile, his brother tries to provoke him. Is the great Yuri going to let that slide? Yuri looks at him quietly, still pretending to be dignified while looking for drama. He thinks, "You haven't changed one bit." Just then, Barkvar closes his eyes and reopens them, his gaze now filled with fury. Yuri watches in silence, thinking to himself that Barkvar's temper needs to be corrected for his own good. I won't let the same mistakes repeat in this life. Yuri recalls how, in his previous life, he had fought Barkvar at this exact time. But it had been a one-sided battle, one that may have been the beginning of Barkvar's resentment toward the kingdom and toward Yuri. Later, at the training grounds, Yuri tosses a wooden sword to Barkvar. "I've heard you're decent with a sword," he says. Barkvar catches it and replies, "I have some skill, but why ask me that all of a sudden?" Yuri narrows his eyes. "Because this kingdom has no place for narrow-minded knights." Barkvar retorts, "I'm not even an official knight yet." "All the more reason," Yuri says, raising his own sword. "I'll treat you as someone destined to become one. Let's see if you're worthy." Barkvar reluctantly accepts. "Fine." Yuri charges forward and declares it a duel. Barkvar scowls. "Coward," he mutters, just before Yuri kicks up sand with his boot, sending it into Barkvar's eyes. Enraged but composed, Barkvar says, "A knight must uphold the code of honor." Hearing that, Yuri suddenly throws away his sword. Barkvar blinks in confusion. Before he can react, Yuri rushes in and lands a clean kick, knocking Barkvar to the ground. Yuri grabs his sword and points it at Barkvar. In his past life, Barkvar betrayed his kingdom and sold out his father's honor to the Empire for information. Yuri looks down at him and says, "Your father is a great count, a respected knight. Do you know why such a title exists?" He lifts the blade slightly, giving Barkvar space to answer. "I understand the hunger to survive," Yuri continues. But in this life, I won't allow a single night under my watch to carry such a weak sense of duty. Then he extends his hand to Barkvar. Still stunned, Barkvar mutters, I don't understand what you mean. Yuri doesn't flinch. Then let me ask again, why is your father a count? Who gave him that power? Barkvar says nothing. Whatever the situation, Yuri adds, you must strive to understand its essence and reflect deeply on what I've said. After a long pause, Barkvar nods and takes Yuri's hand. After standing up, he departs from there. Once he's gone, Yuri's elder brother, who had been watching the duel from a distance, steps forward, grinning. That was entertaining. I liked the fight, he says. Yuri raises an eyebrow. You thought I'd lose? Of course, his brother replies without hesitation. I was sure you'd lose. Yuri says nothing and quietly begins brushing dust off his clothes. Then he looks up and asks, what do you think of me? His brother smirks. You're the kingdom's biggest troublemaker? Yuri nods slowly. He's not wrong. But then he adds, I'm not going to live like that anymore. So maybe you should stop messing around too. His brother stares at him, stunned. What happened to you? Did you lose a few screws in your head? The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the training grounds. Yuri, completely exhausted, finally collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily. Bernard stepped forward, nodding in approval. Well done, he said. That's enough for today. After a brief pause, Bernard added, it's about time you begin learning a mana method. Yuri blinked in surprise. You're saying that already? Bernard smirked slightly. Yes, but not my method. Yuri furrowed his brows. Then whose? Will you not teach me your own? Bernard shook his head. My mana method isn't suited for someone of your caliber or disposition. Instead, I suggest you learn the Betrayal method. Why? Yuri asked, curious. Bernard explained, the Betrayal method is well balanced. Its energy flow is smooth, and its efficiency is exceptional. For someone with your potential, it's the most reliable path forward. Yuri reflected quietly. In my previous life, I mastered the Betrayal method. As a mercenary, I even came close to pushing it to its absolute limit. He stared into the distance, lost in thought. Noticing Yuri's silence, Bernard asked, You're considering a different method, aren't you? After a long moment, Yuri spoke. I want you to recommend someone from the Royal Guard. Not necessarily someone already skilled, but someone with exceptional potential. I want to see it for myself. A memory stirred within him. There was one technique, one I couldn't even attempt in my past life. Bernard placed a hand on his chin, thinking carefully. If it's potential you're after, then Jared might be the right choice. At that moment, Barkvar, who had been nearby, nodded in agreement. Jared fits that description perfectly. Yuri remembered Jared from the final days of the war in his past life. Despite his mediocre skills and lackluster discipline, Jared had somehow survived against all odds. In truth, Yuri had once been astonished that someone like him had made it through so much. He recalled one particular battle, where Jared, frustrated and overwhelmed, had confided in him. The truth was that Jared possessed incredible natural talent, but he had never honed it. By the time the war truly began, both he and Yuri had become like dull, rusted swords. Now, hearing Bernard's suggestion, Yuri stood up and brushed the dirt from his uniform. Without another word, he began walking. I'll go see him myself, he said. It's time I knocked some sense into him. The scene shifts to the Knights' training grounds, where several trainees are practicing their swordsmanship under the setting sun. A brown-haired man watches them with quiet focus. Suddenly, the doors swing open. Yuri enters. The brown-haired man turns to him and asks, What brings you to the training grounds, Your Highness? I just wanted to see how the Knights are doing, Yuri replies calmly. The man nods. Everyone's working hard, he says, then adds with a smile. Though none of us can compare to you. He returns his attention to the training field, watching the Knights from the elevated platform with a look of pride. Yuri scans the field but doesn't see who he's looking for. Where's Jared, he asks. Realization dawns on the brown-haired man's face. Ah, you mean the new rookie? He points across the training field. There, that's Jared. Yuri narrows his eyes as he observes Jared training. So this is what Bernard meant, he thinks. While Jared is going through the motions, he's clearly doing only the bare minimum. That's how he became a rusty sword in the last life. Yuri murmurs to himself. Turning to the man, Yuri says, Rosso, bring me a wooden sword. I'd like to spar. Rosso blinks in surprise, then nods. Yes, Your Highness. Who do you wish to spar with? Yuri points directly at Jared. Him. A few minutes later, the training ground is cleared, and the knights gather to watch the sparring session between Yuri and Jared. The atmosphere grows lively, with knights cheering Jared on, hoping he won't be knocked out too quickly. Jared, however, doesn't seem happy at all about the situation. I've heard you have great potential as a knight, Yuri says to Jared. Show me what kind of knight you are. Though clearly reluctant, Jared nods and takes his stance. Without hesitation, Yuri charges forward. Jared blocks the attack effortlessly, his expression calm and composed. Your movements are sharp, Yuri remarks. Precise. The knights begin cheering for Yuri, but Jared grows increasingly uneasy. He's doing better than I expected, but something feels off. Yuri keeps pressing him, keeping the pace consistent and leaving Jared with no choice but to stay on the defensive. Slowly, Jared realizes something. Yuri is syncing his movements to match mine. Yuri tightens the tempo of the duel, controlling the rhythm with ease. Isn't this boring for you? He asks coldly. We're just putting on a show. Let's go all out. With that, Yuri launches an unexpected attack. Jared reacts quickly and blocks it, earning Yuri's praise. The duel intensifies. Yuri continues his relentless assault while Jared focuses on dodging, growing more pressured by the minute. I underestimated this, Jared thinks. I thought this would be easy. Jared finally strikes back with force. The power behind the blow is enough to stagger Yuri. Despite his past life experience, Yuri knows he's still not at Jared's level. He's a seasoned knight, Yuri admits silently. But even so, I'll land at least one clean hit. Yuri maintains his composure. Then, as Jared momentarily loses balance, Yuri capitalizes on the opening and delivers a precise strike. Gasps erupt from the watching knights. He landed a hit, someone exclaims. The knights begin praising Yuri's swordsmanship. Yuri resets his stance and asks Jared, You're not holding back, are you? Jared shakes his head. No, I'm not. It's strange. I was sure I had the upper hand, but now, I'm the one on the defensive. Yuri moves in again, launching another attack. Jared narrowly dodges it. Frustration builds within Jared. His expression hardens. That's enough. To everyone's surprise, Jared activates his mana method. Rosso and the knights gasp. He's using mana? Against the third prince, someone whispers. Furious, Jared takes his stance, mana flaring around him. He attacks, and though Yuri narrowly dodges, the edge of Jared's blade grazes his forehead, leaving a thin cut. Your Highness. Rosso and the knights rush forward. Yuri raises his hand. I'm fine. This is what sparring looks like, don't worry. Without missing a beat, he tears a strip of cloth and binds it around his forehead. Then he looks back at Jared. Pick up your sword. We're just getting started. Yuri smiles, gripping his weapon tightly. They clash again, and Jared begins to realize something. He's different from me. Unlike Jared, who had been holding back, Yuri was pushing himself to the absolute limit and beyond. Every swing, every step, was driven by relentless effort. He's not just fighting. He's growing, Jared thought. He's becoming something more. And in that moment, Jared knew this was no ordinary prince. This was a warrior on a path he refused to turn back from. Yuri and Jared stood face to face, both in their battle stances. Jared is feeling warmed up and excited, an emotion he had never experienced, not even when fighting opponents far stronger than himself. Fueled by adrenaline, Jared launched an aggressive attack. Yuri blocked it with ease, only intensifying Jared's frustration. In response, Yuri leapt forward to strike, but Jared swiftly dodged, sensing something unusual surging from within Yuri. Seeing an opening, Jared retaliated with a powerful mana-infused technique. Although Yuri managed to block the strike, the impact shattered his wooden sword in half. Yuri let out a breath, followed by a laugh. Looks like the match is over, he said. Exhausted, Jared relaxed his stance and settled down. Yuri approached him, extending his hand. I learned something from you today, he said. Jared shook his hand firmly. Likewise. That was impressive. As they stood there, Jared couldn't shake what he had just witnessed, Yuri's unwavering fighting spirit and sheer determination. It was something Jared had never seen before, and it lingered in his mind, stirring his curiosity. Yuri noticed Jared spacing out. What are you doing? He asked. Startled, Jared snapped out of it. Yuri continued. You're just standing there, after making the third prince bleed? Jared's eyes widened in horror. I am so sorry, he exclaimed, bowing repeatedly before turning and running away in panic. Yuri let out a small chuckle and collapsed onto the ground to catch his breath. That brought back memories, he thought. Meanwhile, the other knights began cheering for Yuri's performance. Amidst the applause, Rosso spotted someone at the entrance. "Captain, when did you get here?" The man standing there gave a calm nod. Just now. He was none other than Sand, the captain of Briol's royal guard. His eyes focused on Yuri, who lay resting on the training ground. A few days later, Gerard was walking near the palace gardens when he was startled to find the third prince waiting for him. "I heard you just finished your shift," Yuri said. "Good. Come with me. We've got something to do today." Gerard blinked. "Your Highness, I was planning to train." Yuri turned around with a sly smile. "It's good that your mindset has improved. And since I helped you with that, don't you think it's time to repay the favor?" Left with no choice, Gerard reluctantly agreed. Yuri looked him over. "He's got some strength now. Still not enough, but it'll do for now." As they walked together, Gerard asked, "Where exactly are we going?" "Quiet," Yuri replied. "Just follow me." Gerard frowned. "I won't let you do anything reckless." Yuri grinned. "Don't worry. We're not going alone. Someone else is coming too." "Who?" Yuri cupped his hands and shouted, "Hernando." From a nearby corridor, a man turned at the sound of his name. It was Hernando, Briol's court mage. He approached, eyebrow raised. "What do you need, Your Highness?" Yuri skipped the formalities. "I need you to assist me. We're heading out." Hernando gave an apologetic smile. "I'd love to help, but I've got somewhere to be." Yuri leaned closer. "If you come with me, I'll pay off your debts." Hernando's eyes widened in shock. "Are you serious?" "I am," Yuri confirmed. "And I'll even settle the debt you owe me from last time." To seal his sincerity, Yuri added, "Have you ever known me to lie?" Hernando raised an eyebrow. "No." Yuri beamed. Yuri turned to leave. "I'll pay it. So come along." Hernando reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded contract. "Sign this first," he said. Yuri stared at it in disbelief. "So this is what my title as the third prince of Briol is worth?" Sighing, he turned to Gerard. "You'll be my guarantor." Gerard stiffened. "Wait, what?" "I'm not asking you to co-sign the contract," Yuri said. "Just be a witness to my words." Gerard sighed. "If you say so." Finally, with the matter settled, they set off. "So, where are we going?" Hernando asked. "You brought a knight and a mage. That's not exactly a stroll in the gardens." Yuri grinned. "We're going to Sword Mountain." Both Hernando and Gerard exchanged confused glances. "Sword Mountain." Yuri laughed. "That's right. We're going to loot our ancestors' dungeon." The scene shifts to Yuri, Gerard, and Hernando walking through a hidden passage beneath the palace, one that few even knew existed. Gerard, holding a torch and leading the way, glances back and asks Yuri what lies at the end of the tunnel. "It leads to Sword Mountain," Yuri replies. Gerard blinks, confused. "All I know about Sword Mountain is the legend tied to the progenitor." Yuri nods. The legend is true. In his past life, after the Empire had taken over Briol, Yuri read in a newspaper that a dungeon had been discovered within Sword Mountain. The report stated that the Empire had excavated the legacy of Briol's progenitor from the site, causing a massive uproar. The passage they now walked had originally been intended as an escape route, which was why the Briol legacy had been handed over to the Empire before it could ever be used. But this time, things were different. Yuri was no longer running from responsibility. In this life, he was determined to face everything head-on, to give his all and move forward. He wanted to see the legacy his ancestor left behind with his own eyes. The scene then transitions to a beautiful forest as Yuri pushes open the dungeon door, revealing a path that leads into the woods. As they begin walking, Hernando looks around and comments, "If we keep heading straight, we'll eventually reach Sword Mountain." Curious, he asks, "By the way, how did you even get the key to that door?" "It's an artifact." Yuri remains silent for a moment, recalling how he had found the key hidden in the corner of the study room, just like in his past life. Back then, he hadn't known its significance, and that ignorance had come at a cost. The memory stung. "It doesn't concern you," Yuri finally replies. As they walk deeper into the forest, Hernando brushes against a thorny plant, letting out a yelp as his hand gets cut. "Be careful," Yuri warns. "These plants have sharp leaves. Stay close." Hernando, now irritated, leans toward Gerard and mutters, "Has Yuri been eating something strange lately?" Gerard nods. "It seems like it. His behavior has completely changed." Before they can say more, Yuri suddenly shouts, "Hurry up! Follow me!" Startled, they catch up. Hernando mumbles, "Well, his temperament definitely hasn't changed." Suddenly, Yuri freezes. He motions for them to stop. "Direwolves," he whispers. "They're moving in packs, and there could be more nearby." Gerard frowns. "How do you know that?" "I read about it," Yuri answers casually. Hernando gapes. "You read a book?" Ignoring the remark, Yuri says, "Stay low. They haven't noticed us yet. Let's slip past quietly." Unfortunately, as Hernando takes a step, he snaps a twig. The sharp crack echoes through the woods. He grimaces. "I'm so sorry, but it's too late. The direwolves have already spotted them." They charge. Gerard springs into action, drawing his sword and immediately taking down one of the beasts. "Impressive," Yuri comments. "But now you've caught the attention of their alpha." A deep howl pierces the air, and soon, the pack surrounds them. Gerard immediately instructs, "Stay behind me. Don't get separated." He fends off one wolf after another, but the numbers are overwhelming. Hernando watches in awe. His fighting spirit is incredible. Yuri nods. Gerard is skilled, but he's still not strong enough to handle a pack of this size. As Gerard begins to struggle, Yuri calls out to Hernando, "My father had complete faith in your abilities, Hernando. It's time you proved him right." Hernando chuckles. "So, you really want to get your money's worth out of a battle mage, huh?" Gerard, confused, glances back. "What?" Before he can finish, Hernando conjures a fireball and hurls it toward the direwolf Gerard is locked in combat with. Gerard barely dodges in time, separating himself from both the fireball and the beast. The scene transitions to a cliff at the peak of Sword Mountain. Hernando wipes his brow. "I didn't expect to see monsters other than direwolves." Gerard, breathing heavily, agrees. "We may have delayed them, but we've made it." Yuri scans the area, searching for something. Gerard looks around, puzzled. "Are we in the right place? I don't see any relics." Yuri walks up to a massive stone. "We are." He kneels and begins digging. Gerard rushes over. "Wait, what are you doing?" "There's something here," Yuri explains. Seeing Yuri dig with such urgency, Gerard joins him. "Hernando, help us." Hernando groans. A battle mage wounding his hands, what a disgrace. After some effort, Yuri finally pulls something from the ground. A magnificent sword, still gleaming despite being buried for decades. It looks untouched by time. On the blade is a single word, "Guilty." Gerard stares. Is this the Founder's relic?" "I'm not sure," Yuri replies. Suddenly, the ground begins to shake violently. Yuri laughs. "We're about to find out." The next moment, the earth gives way, and all three of them plunge into a deep, hidden pit. All three of them fell into what appeared to be a dungeon, at the center of which stood a massive crystal. Yuri was caught and saved by Gerard, who managed to cushion his own fall by reinforcing his body using a mana method. Noticing this, Yuri commented with admiration, "You used mana to protect yourself? Impressive." Hernando, meanwhile, floated gently down using a levitation spell. As he landed and glanced around, he muttered, "This place is far deeper than I imagined." Seeing Hernando's calm descent, Yuri gripped the hilt of his sword. He prioritized his own safety over mine. The gesture wasn't lost on Hernando, who began sweating nervously. It was an emergency. I didn't mean to ignore you, just reacted instinctively." Suddenly, Hernando spun around, sensing something. His expression changed to one of alarm. "Wait, what is that?" Yuri glanced over. "Trying to change the subject now?" "No," Hernando shouted, pointing ahead. "There's a ghost in armor walking toward us." Yuri turned and froze. A figure clad in heavy armor slowly approached, its body radiating a dark, eerie energy. "It's a death knight," Yuri muttered. Understanding the danger, he quickly called out, "Gerard, wake up." Gerard was still groggy, but with a swift kick from Yuri, he snapped to attention. "What's happening?" Gerard's eyes widened when he saw the Death Knight. He immediately leapt into a battle stance, placing himself between Yuri and the threat. Yuri, impressed by his quick reaction, nodded silently. The Death Knight continued its approach, and then suddenly stopped. Yuri began to explain. A Death Knight is a warrior resurrected from death. In most cases, they become far stronger than they were in life. Despite the tension, Yuri stepped forward. "But I don't think this one is hostile." "What makes you say that?" Gerard asked, tense. "I can feel it," Yuri replied. "This Death Knight is guarding the Founder's dungeon. There's no way he would attack someone who shares the Founder's blood. He walked toward the Death Knight. Am I right? The Death Knight said nothing. Instead, it silently drew its sword, startling both Gerard and Hernando. With lightning speed, the Death Knight swung his sword, but Yuri dodged. The blade falls into the ground, missing him by inches. From behind, Hernando gasped. I can't believe you were able to dodge the strike. Yuri glared. Shut up. Hernando flinched. I was surprised, that's all. Just then, the Death Knight finally spoke. That arrogant tone. You sound just like the Founder. Then, he sheathed his sword. Yuri narrowed his eyes. Founder? You mean Eric Betrayal? At the mention of the name, both Gerard and Hernando gasped. Eric Betrayal. The name was legendary. The peerless swordsman who had once conquered the continent with a single blade. The first king and founder of Betrayal, the land of knights. Are you talking about him? Yuri asked. The Death Knight nodded. You are the first to arrive here. Unless the wielder is a descendant of Betrayal, they cannot draw that sword. Yuri unsheathed the relic sword he had found. This is really the peerless sword wielded by the Founder. But the Death Knight corrected him. That sword belonged to me when I was alive. Yuri made a strange face. The Death Knight frowned. What's that look for? You have a problem with that. Yuri quickly waved his hand, sweating. No, not at all. I just feel bad for touching your personal weapon without permission. The atmosphere shifted. The Death Knight stared at Yuri. Why are you here? Yuri gripped the sword tightly. I am Yuri Betrayal, third prince of the Betrayal kingdom, and rightful heir to Eric Betrayal's legacy. I have come to inherit that legacy. The Death Knight turned his back and began walking toward the massive crystal. Then the time has come. I must fulfill my duty. Yuri followed without hesitation. Gerard, however, was frozen. This can't be real. We're in the Founder's dungeon, talking with a Death Knight. This isn't what I imagined when I became a royal guard. As he remained deep in thought, Yuri turned around. What are you doing? Startled, Gerard looked up, his mind flashing back to a moment during the war when he and Yuri had shared a brief but meaningful exchange. You coming or not? Yuri asked. Gerard hesitated, then scratched his head. Yeah, I'm coming. He followed. The Death Knight approached the giant crystal and sat upon it. The formation revealed it was not just a stone, but the backrest of an ancient throne. The crystal began to glow brighter and brighter. The Death Knight closed his eyes. I hope all three of you are worthy. Suddenly, Yuri found himself standing alone in a desert-like expanse. Confused, he scanned the horizon. Where am I? In the distance, he spotted a white figure approaching, clad in armor, sword in hand. Is that the Founder of Betrayal? As the figure drew closer and took a battle stance, Yuri's eyes narrowed. No, that's not human. The figure attacked. Yuri blocked and reeled back, studying the strange entity. It's not a person, it's a mana method given form. The scene shifts to the mysterious white, human-like figure. It places a finger on its chest, gathering mana at its core, and then channels that energy into its sword. Yuri observes closely, wondering if the figure is trying to teach him how to control and infuse mana into his weapon. After demonstrating the technique, the figure points its sword at Yuri, clearly challenging him to fight. Yuri quickly realizes what's happening. The figure wants him to replicate the process during combat. Yuri chuckles to himself. My ancestors are out of their minds, he mutters. Trying to teach mana control to someone who hasn't even learned a proper method yet, and doing it in the middle of a fight. But he also knows, this is something only someone in their second life could attempt. Which means I can do it, he affirms internally. Yuri drops into a seated position, pressing his hands to the ground. A faint blue mana begins to form around his palms, growing stronger and more vibrant with each passing second. He begins to understand the technique the white figure was showing him. Standing, Yuri calls out, sword now imbued with mana. All right, let's continue. I think I get the gist of it, but I'm still figuring it out. The figure laughs in response, taking its stance once again. Yuri steadies his breathing, focusing his mind. In the near future, the Empire will bare its fangs and invade Betrayal. I won't let that happen again. He readies his sword. This time, I will destroy their army. I will not repeat my past mistakes. With newfound determination, Yuri charges forward, attacking the figure with the intent to absorb and learn the swordsmanship of Eric Betrayal, the founder of Betrayal himself. The figure counters his strike with ease, laughing as their blades clash. The scene shifts. Gerard opens his eyes and finds himself in a familiar training ground. Only now, it's completely deserted. No knights, no sound, no presence. Just silence. This isn't a dream, he tells himself, standing cautiously. A sudden noise startles him. Gerard instinctively places a hand on his sword and calls out, "Who's there? Show yourself." From behind him, a figure steps forward, someone who looks exactly like him. Gerard turns quickly, then starts laughing. A doppelganger, huh? So this is part of the Death Knight's test. He draws his sword. "Do you have my name too?" The other Gerard smirks. "Don't fight your fate." Gerard frowns. "What does that mean?" His doppelganger steps closer. "You became a royal knight because you wanted an easy, comfortable life. But the more you cling to Yuri, the more you're straying from your path. Keep this up, and your life will end in misery." Gerard exhales slowly and stares at his reflection on the blade. If this were the old me, I might have agreed. But that was before he had sparred and spoken with Yuri. Before his mindset had changed. "You're wrong," Gerard said. "You're just a fake, so you wouldn't understand. A sword, once swung, can't be taken back. Dwelling on the past just dulls your edge." The doppelganger narrowed his eyes, drew his sword, and unleashed a mana-infused strike. Gerard parried the blow. "Your attacks are simple," he observed. "All defense. No conviction. No risk." He stepped forward and broke through the guard, landing a clean hit. "You're nothing but a boring version of my past self." The doppelganger stumbled and hit the ground, suddenly breaking apart, morphing it into a grotesque, goblin-like creature made of sludge. "So this is your real form," Gerard thought grimly. He assumed his stance again, thinking of Yuri. "If I'm in a fight here, Yuri must be facing something too." With renewed resolve, he prepared a finishing attack, silently praying, "Please, overcome it, Yuri." The scene cuts back to the battlefield where Yuri faces off against the white figure. Yuri now sits on a stone, visibly defeated. The white figure approaches slowly, raising its sword, ready to strike. Just as the white, human-like figure was about to strike, Yuri grabbed his sword, infused it with mana, and launched a counterattack, finally landing a hit. Although the strike connected, the figure remained unharmed, stepping back to regain its balance. Yuri steadied his stance, wondering how much time had passed. Things had grown dangerous, but thanks to the extended sparring, Yuri had learned how to utilize the figure's mana method. More importantly, he had finally understood how to properly wield his sword. As Yuri processed these thoughts, he noticed the white figure's sword beginning to crumble. Moments later, the figure itself started to fade. Before vanishing entirely, it waved goodbye. Realizing time was up, Yuri gave a respectful nod and thanked the figure for the lesson. Soon after, and both he and the figure disappeared from the illusionary world. The scene shifts back to the dungeon. Yuri opened his eyes and found himself lying on the stone floor once again. Beside him, Gerard and Hernando were also awakening, checking on one another. The Death Knight, still seated upon the crystalline throne, observed them calmly. "It seems you all had a pleasant dream," he remarked. Yuri stood and asked, "What was that exactly?" The Death Knight rose to his feet. It was Eric's final plan, a legacy meant for the heir of Betrayal, should one ever come seeking the dungeon. Yuri's expression darkened. In his past life, the Empire had completely destroyed Sword Mountain. As a result, no member of the Betrayal family had ever reached the dungeon. With that in mind, he turned to the Death Knight. That mana method, the one the figure used, did the founder really use it? The Death Knight shook his head. "No, that wasn't Eric's method. It was the last legacy left behind by me." Yuri's eyes widened. The Death Knight continued. "It was a culmination of all the enlightenment I gained during my final years wandering the East. And you, Yuri, are the first to inherit it." Surprised, Yuri asked, "Then why wasn't this passed down directly through the royal family?" The Death Knight responded solemnly, "Because the dungeon only reveals itself when the time is right. And now that it has opened, it means the time to use that power is approaching." Yuri attempted to press further. "When exactly is that time?" But the Death Knight did not answer. "You'll have to discover that for yourself." Yuri raised his sword, imbuing it with mana. "Then tell me, what is the name of this mana method?" The Death Knight answered firmly. "It is called Soul Severance." He then instructed, "Kneel." Yuri dropped to one knee. The Death Knight placed his hand on Yuri's head. "Never fear your enemies." "Yes," Yuri responded. Act upon your beliefs, the Death Knight continued. Fulfill your duty to the very end. I will, Yuri said. Then, suddenly, the Death Knight gripped Yuri's hair and violently yanked it back. But above all else, remember this. Betrayal never abandons its honor, even in death. With those final words, the Death Knight vanished into the air, leaving only silence behind. Yuri's eyes glowed red as he stared at the empty space where the knight had stood. The next morning, Aina came to wake Yuri up. You look exhausted, she said. Is it because you came back to the castle so late last night? Yuri looked like he'd fall asleep again if he so much as lay back down. He yawned and apologized. I visited the royal palace archives. That piqued Aina's curiosity. What for all of a sudden? There was a record I needed to find, Yuri replied. Something important. Among the historical texts in the archive, Yuri had discovered a note, one stating that the founder, Eric Betrayal, had a brother, a nameless man who abandoned his honor and vanished from history. That was when Yuri realized the truth. The Death Knight was Eric's brother, and the original owner of the sword Yuri had unearthed. As Yuri rose from bed, Aina informed him, Your father is waiting for you. Please get dressed quickly. Why? Yuri asked. I don't know the reason, Aina admitted. But I heard he summoned you right after speaking with Lord Hernando. Yuri froze for a moment. Of course, Hernando must have told him everything. He recalled how, just before they left the Sword Forest, Hernando had casually mentioned, I'll be reporting all this to your father. Turning to Hernando, Yuri had asked, Is that really necessary? Hernando had only laughed. I think it is. With a resigned sigh, Yuri dressed quickly and headed to the audience chamber. When he arrived, he asked, Did you summon me, father? His father nodded. Yes. Hernando told me everything. Not only did you leave the palace without permission, you also discovered the founder's dungeon atop Sword Mountain. Yuri scratched his head. It kind of turned out that way. His father stepped down from the throne and approached him. Lately, everyone's been telling me how much you've changed. Aina, Bernard, Johannes, and now even Hernando. He placed a hand on Yuri's head. So tell me, he said softly, what brought about this change? Yuri looked away and began stepping back. His father narrowed his eyes. Why aren't you answering? I will, Yuri said quietly. Then why step back like that? And with that look on your face? Because your fist is clenched. His father blinked, then relaxed his hand. All right, tell me. Yuri took a breath. I had a dream. A long one. In that dream, I committed a great crime. His father's expression turned serious. What kind of crime? Yuri, standing in front of his father, reveals that his sin was failing to protect Betrayal until the very end. He explains that, in his dream, Betrayal was engulfed in a great war where countless people were taken down. Yuri tried to change the course of events, but he failed. After the kingdom fell, he wandered without honor and ultimately perished. He continues, saying that when he woke from the dream, the necklace his mother had given him was gone. He wondered if the dream had been a warning from his mother. Upon hearing all this, Fiore asks Yuri what caused the fall of the kingdom in his dream. Yuri hesitates, frightened, because he believes it's too soon to bring up the Empire. Since he's altering the past, there's still a chance the Empire won't invade. Choosing to lie, Yuri tells his father that he doesn't know who attacked them, that it was an unidentified army. After hearing this, Fiore agrees, saying he's unsure whether it was just a nightmare or a warning from Lily, but he's glad to see Yuri doing better. Hearing that, Yuri questions if he truly is doing better, believing that he's merely doing what he can to repent for his sins. Fiore then tells Yuri there's one more matter to address and orders him to bring his sword. Fiore Betrayal is a genius, said to have picked up a sword as soon as he could walk. He has always excelled in many areas, and his martial prowess earned him a place in the continent's history. At this point in time, Fiore is considered the strongest among the top 10 sword masters on the continent. Both Yuri and Fiore retrieve their swords and face each other. In other words, Fiore is the most powerful sword master on the continent. Yuri comments that it's his first time inside his father's personal training hall. Fiore expresses his inner thoughts, admitting that he had always believed none of his sons had any real talent for swordsmanship. Hearing this, Yuri pouts and responds that he believes he's fairly talented. Fiore sighs deeply and, while pointing his sword at Yuri, asks how one defines a swordsman's talent. Is it strength? Speed? Reflexes? Willpower? If someone possesses all these traits, does that make them a great swordsman? Fiore answers his own question, saying no, it doesn't. He reveals that the most important trait is something that allows a person to surpass their limits, an element far stronger than fear or a sense of duty. As he speaks, Fiore's eyes begin to emit a red aura, shocking Yuri, who instinctively takes a battle stance in response to the sudden shift in his father's aura. Seeing this, Fiore sheaths his sword and admits he doesn't quite know how to explain it, but calls it a calling. Yuri, still stunned, lowers his stance and asks if his father is referring to something like fate. Fiore closes his eyes and says that it may or may not be. Yuri begins reflecting, staring at his shadow. In his past life, he wasn't destined to walk the path of a swordsman, but he wonders if he might want to pursue it in this life. He then gazes at his reflection in the blade. Fiore asks whether Yuri feels fated to wield a sword, if he hears a calling toward it. He continues, asking if Yuri believes he'll still have a sword in his hand in the distant future, even when facing death. Yuri ponders for a moment, then shakes his head and says he doesn't feel anything. But as he looks at his father, he's overwhelmed by the same dangerous aura and becomes terrified. He calls out to his father, but is suddenly overcome by the feeling of countless eyes watching him, amplifying his fear. He begins hallucinating, hearing soldiers urging him to run. Suddenly, Yuri opens his eyes and finds himself back on the deadly battlefield he once fought on. When he regains consciousness, he looks around in horror, realizing Betrayal is engulfed in flames. At the same time, he hears the Empire's soldiers closing in, intent on eliminating him. A large platoon charges toward him, and Yuri quickly realizes he has returned to the moment when the Empire attacked once more. As he attempts to process the situation, a soldier suddenly attacks him from behind. However, Yuri senses the threat and blocks the incoming strike. He manages to overpower the enemy, and just then, one of his own soldiers runs up, informing him that they'll hold off the enemies. Hearing that, Yuri turns around as the soldier urges him to flee while they buy him time. More soldiers echo the plea, standing their ground against a charging platoon, and Yuri's hope begins to waver. He wonders if everything has been just a dream, if Betrayal was always destined to fall, no matter what. Yuri drives his sword into the ground, admitting to himself that he can't stop what's coming. The enemy forces charge toward him, but he readies his sword, determined to resist his fate. He has already made an oath, not to fear his enemies. With that conviction, he remembers the Death Knight's advice, to act according to his beliefs and carry out the duty of Betrayal until the very end. With full resolve, Yuri rushes toward the enemy and takes down soldier after soldier. One armed with a spear lunges at him, but Yuri blocks the strike with his arm and counters with his sword. Now breathless and exhausted, he stands to catch his breath, but more enemies close in, demanding that he surrender. Refusing, Yuri channels mana into his blade and declares that the people of Betrayal do not abandon their honor, even in the face of death. He charges forward once again, committed to carrying out his duty to Betrayal until the bitter end. Suddenly, the scene shifts. Yuri is once again a child, but his eyes are glowing red. Fiore places a hand on his shoulder and gently calls his name, asking if Yuri can hear him. When Yuri doesn't respond, Fiore calls out again, louder. That breaks the trance, and Yuri returns to his senses. He tells his father about the army attack, though he still hides the full truth. Fiore tells him to calm down, assuring him that what he just saw was only an illusion. Yuri steadies himself, but his hands tremble as he grips his sword. While Yuri silently contemplates, staring at the blade in his hands, Fiore observes him quietly. He finally admits to himself that he was wrong, and accepts that Yuri will walk the path of the sword. Hearing this, Yuri smiles, agreeing with his father and telling him that he's already made that decision. Fiore's face then darkens with sadness. Seeing it, Yuri wonders why his father looks that way. He suspects Fiore is thinking Yuri might die soon or face danger beyond his control. With that thought, Yuri grabs his father and assures him that he doesn't need to worry too much. After all, Yuri is a genius. Fiore chuckles at that and gives Yuri a solid punch. Sometime later, Yuri arrives at the training ground to spar with Bernard. When Bernard sees him, he immediately comments on the mark on Yuri's forehead, asking who created such a masterpiece. Yuri casually replies that it was Fiore who punched him. Bernard laughs, noting that it looks like his father went rougher than usual, but adds that it won't make him go any easier on today's training. Yuri responds that he already knows. He then thinks to himself that Bernard only stayed in Betrayal because of his father. Curious, Yuri asks Bernard if he remained in Betrayal under the condition of having a duel with Fury. Bernard confirms that's true. Yuri then asks if Bernard would stay even if that duel never happens, if Yuri asked him to. Bernard looks at him and laughs, saying that in that case, he wouldn't stay. Internally, Yuri remarks that Bernard is heartless. But Bernard grins and says it seems like Yuri wants him to stay. He tells Yuri that if he can show him something convincing, then he'll consider it. Specifically, Bernard challenges Yuri to demonstrate the swordsmanship of his ancestor, Eric Betrayal. Yuri is stunned by what he hears and asks Bernard if he truly wants to learn the founding king's sword technique. Bernard confirms, showing clear interest, saying the technique has piqued his curiosity. Yuri becomes anxious and refuses to teach it. He thinks it makes sense that someone known as the Sword Demon would want to learn it, but his concern remains. Bernard reassures him, saying it doesn't matter if Yuri hasn't mastered it yet. He already considered that possibility. Yuri agrees that Bernard is right, but explains that it's not the real issue. The reason he can't teach it is because the technique is inseparable from the mana method. Yuri draws his sword and demonstrates the technique to Bernard. Learning that the technique is fused with a mana method only deepens Bernard's interest, as it's the first time he's encountered anything like it. Typically, mana methods are used to reinforce sword techniques, not be one with them. Yuri halts the demonstration and tells Bernard that this is why he can't teach it. Otherwise, Bernard would only receive half of what the technique truly is. Bernard thinks for a moment, then agrees, deciding to give up on learning it. Yuri is surprised and asks if he's truly okay with that. Bernard responds that even if it's only half of the technique, he's fine with it. And in return, he agrees to stay in Betrayal if Yuri is willing to teach him. He believes he can still gain something valuable from it. Yuri, silently impressed by Bernard's confidence, smiles and agrees. He will teach him, but only if Bernard keeps his word and stays in Betrayal. Bernard accepts the condition and steps back to create distance. Then, pointing his sword at Yuri, he asks for a proper demonstration. Yuri prepares his stance to activate the mana technique, but just as he's about to move, Bernard says he forgot to mention something. He reveals that he had already decided to stay in Betrayal. Shocked, Yuri freezes as Bernard continues, saying that Yuri's father wants him to serve for at least 10 more years. Yuri, flustered, tries to finalize the terms they just agreed on, but Bernard interrupts and asks why he hasn't made his move yet. Then, using mana on his sword, Bernard decides to attack first. Yuri, now frustrated with Bernard, launches his counterattack, asking why he chose to reveal that now. The scene transitions to a sunset over Betrayal. Yuri lies on his bed, gazing at his hand, and reflects that the future is already starting to change, one different from the timeline in which Betrayal fell. He's certain of it because Bernard chose to stay, even though Yuri hadn't done anything to influence that decision. It's proof that the future is shifting. Though once overwhelmed by the burden of altering fate, Yuri now feels hopeful. The future is changing, slowly but surely, and this time, he's determined to stop the Empire, no matter what. As Yuri looks at his clenched fist, Aina repeats his words, catching his attention. She begs him not to get into trouble again. Hearing this, Yuri stands and jokingly asks if she's accusing him of planning something already. Aina responds that he doesn't even realize how often he causes problems. She then reminds him of the meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Unsurprisingly, Yuri has no idea what she's talking about. Aina tells him he's expected to meet with the Senate and adds that his father said Yuri must attend this time. She asks if no one informed him. Yuri, realizing he completely forgot, Aina tells him that most of the senators will be attending. She then grabs his hand and pleads with him, saying she knows many of them are stern and intimidating, but insists that he must not punch anyone. Yuri wonders if that's what she was most worried about and laughs, assuring her that he doesn't act like that anymore. Aina remains skeptical and demands a promise. Yuri laughs again and assures her that he means it. The next morning, Yuri arrives at the meeting room, where many senators have gathered, except for his father. One senator slams the table, confirming Aina's warning. Duke Jetari is already expressing his opposition. Jetari loudly objects, saying it's inappropriate for the prince to learn a mana method that hasn't been officially approved. He's not alone. Several other senators echo his disapproval, unwilling to listen to reason. What was meant to be a discussion about the kingdom's management has turned into a forum to challenge the king's authority. Yuri begins to understand why his father no longer attends these meetings. Jetari suggests that Yuri would be better off learning the Betrayal technique instead of the founders. At this, a green-haired senator speaks up, disagreeing with Jetari. He points out that even if the technique isn't officially approved, it was still left behind by the founding king. Jetari counters by asking how the green-haired man can be certain that it was truly the founder's technique. The green-haired man grows angrier and shouts, asking if Jetari is trying to question the prince. Jetari remains calm and responds that he's only suggesting they should be certain about such matters. He then looks at Yuri and says that their concern is simply for the prince's well-being. Yuri smiles at that and asks if the entire meeting has been called just to discuss his mana method. He tells Jetari that he's touched by their concern. However, while feigning interest in Jetari's words, Yuri is flexing his muscles, suppressing his irritation. Jetari, after all, is a traitor, someone who bowed to the Empire's emperor the moment Betrayal fell. His words carry no weight in Yuri's eyes. Jetari then turns to Sane, the captain of the Betrayal Royal Guards, and asks for his opinion. Sane begins to sweat and hesitantly replies that he cannot reach a conclusion just yet. Jetari questions why, and Sane explains that every mana method has its own advantages and drawbacks. Moreover, their effects differ greatly from person to person. Hearing this, Jetari slams both hands on the table and rises to his feet, proclaiming that this uncertainty is exactly why he doesn't want the prince to learn such a method. If even the captain of the royal guards is unsure, then the risk is too high. He declares that it would be best to abandon the mana method altogether. The green-haired man counters, saying that Sane wasn't suggesting that at all. He clarifies that Sane was merely pointing out the natural strengths and weaknesses of any mana method. But before he can finish, Jetari's minion, a brown-haired man, interrupts, claiming it's essentially the same thing. He insists that the Duke is only worried the mana method could endanger the prince. Suddenly, two other senators nod in agreement. Yuri notices and begins to wonder why they would side with Jetari. He starts to worry as the situation becomes more complicated. More senators are aligning with Jetari, giving him the upper hand in the discussion. If Yuri had only recently started training in a mana method, it might still be possible to switch to another. However, due to the battle he experienced within the founding king's illusion, the soul severance technique has already taken root within his core. He cannot explain this to the Senate, leaving him at a disadvantage. Yuri grows anxious, unsure of what to say next. Just then, a voice rises from across the hall, saying the arguments sound convincing enough. The other senators gasp in surprise at the speaker. The man raises his hand, asking for permission to speak. It is the black-haired man, Baron Calcio Arancha. He steps forward and asks a pointed question. How many of the senators present have actually fought a real orc before? All the senators begin to whisper among themselves, wondering who Arancha is. Jetari then asks him to state his name and title. Arancha stands and introduces himself as a free baron. Jetari is clearly displeased to learn that a free baron is attending a Senate meeting. Arancha responds that he didn't want to come either, but he couldn't avoid it since Count Sitter personally asked him to attend. Hearing that Sitter sent him, Yuri recalls that Count Sitter is the founding lord who guards Betrayal's border. Sitter is a man who has spent his entire life on the battlefield and is renowned for being a true soldier. Yuri also remembers that Sitter is known for never attending noble gatherings, yet now, he has sent a representative to the Senate. The green-haired man asks Arancha why Sitter sent him. Arancha responds that Sitter doesn't owe anyone an explanation, especially not him. However, he adds that after seeing the high-ranking nobles gathered here playing politics with one another, he now understands exactly why Sitter sent him. Arancha continues by stating that the type of mana method doesn't make much difference on the battlefield. Whether it's Betrayal's method or the Empire's loin method, it doesn't matter, because in the end, it all depends on the individual using it. After saying this, he turns to Yuri and asks for his thoughts. Yuri replies that he agrees with Arancha's view. As a prince, he doesn't see why mastering the mana method left behind by their founder should be considered controversial. He tells everyone present that he will learn it, regardless of their objections. Arancha responds that if the prince who wields the sword has chosen to follow the founder's will, then there's no need for unrelated people to make such a fuss. To Yuri, Arancha shines in that moment. Arancha adds that people who have never drawn a sword are the ones who argue about which mana method should be learned. Jetari scoffs at Arancha's reckless remarks. With a straight face, Arancha apologizes, explaining that fighting orcs every day at the frontier tends to change a person. He then asks Jetari how many senators here have actually fought orcs. None of the senators respond. Arancha presses on, asking if they really believe orcs care about which mana method is being used. The senators fall silent, unable to respond. At that point, the brown-haired man speaks up, saying that even if they accept Arancha's argument, the prince is still young and may not be able to make the right decision. Hearing this, Yuri challenges him, asking whether, if he made the wrong choice, they would discard the mana method altogether and revise it from the beginning. The green-haired man responds that they could, if necessary. Yuri becomes furious and asks if he even realizes that such a thing is impossible. Arancha steps in, saying that Prince Yuri has no intention of yielding anyway, so he questions why the senators are trying so hard to extract his core. The green-haired man starts sweating and quickly clarifies that he never meant it that way. Arancha laughs and says there's no point in continuing the discussion, then asks if Yuri agrees. Yuri smiles in response. Arancha remarks that despite this being a useless meeting, all the senators have gathered here just to stress themselves out. It makes him wonder if the royal capital has too much free time on its hands. Jetari becomes furious and slams the table, accusing Arancha of being rude. He tries to corner him by pointing out that the frontier has remained quiet recently, despite receiving substantial funding. At that, Arancha's expression hardens. He asks if Jetari means to say the frontier is only considered not quiet when hundreds of soldiers die every day. He then states that it's clear Jetari has never read, or cared to read, the daily reports about the soldiers dying out there. Arancha reveals that even on the day he departed, 4 soldiers were killed. That friend had shared breakfast with him that very morning. With grim honesty, Arancha says that orcs never rest. They live only for battle. His words leave the entire chamber in silence. Meanwhile, Yuri begins to think about the orcs and recalls events from his previous life. He remembers that, around this time, there was a border issue with the Klein Duchy. During the conflict between Betrayal and Klein, orcs had taken advantage of the chaos and crossed the border, causing massive destruction. Yuri turns to Arancha and asks if orc activity has changed recently. Arancha confirms that they've become more ominous than usual. Yuri then asks about Klein. Arancha appears confused, so Yuri clarifies by asking whether Klein's army is also stationed along that section of the border. Arancha explains that Klein's border forces suddenly withdrew. Curious, Yuri asks about the nearby towns. Arancha informs him that they were completely devastated. Yuri thinks to himself that timelines may be overlapping and wonders if a civil war is unfolding. Then Arancha suddenly comments aloud that the Duke's 3rd son has caused trouble again. All the senators are shocked by this statement. At that moment, Yuri coughs, then rises from his seat and decides to officially end the meeting. Jetari tries to speak, but Yuri turns around and smiles, telling him to stop wasting time debating his mana method. They should be discussing more pressing matters, like the situation with Klein and the orc threat. Yuri then shuts the door as Jetari stands fuming. As the door fully closes, Yuri tells the remaining senators to stop fussing over a teenage boy already. The sun begins to set, and elsewhere in the capital, Arancha is speaking with Sitter, updating him on the Senate meeting. Sitter is surprised to hear what Yuri did. Arancha also mentions the growing rumors that Yuri has completely changed. When Sitter asks for his opinion, Arancha chuckles and says Yuri had a determined look in his eyes. Sitter smiles, saying that Yuri is worth investigating. He then instructs Arancha to have Calco look into the 3rd prince. Arancha informs him that not much has been revealed about Yuri so far, and requests permission to investigate further. Sitter grants it, saying to proceed if necessary. Arancha stands up, affirming that he will take care of it, and Sitter ends the communication, saying he'll call again later. Afterwards, Arancha gazes out the window and comments that the capital feels oddly peaceful, even though soldiers are dying every day at the border. As he looks outside, he spots a child walking through the street in a gown. It turns out to be the 3rd prince. Later that night, Hernando says they've managed to slip out of the palace undetected. He admits that his heart is racing, recalling how often he used to run away from home when he was younger. Yuri jokes, asking if it was something like running away 3 times a day. Hernando laughs and says that's pretty close, He was a delinquent teenager, after all. As they continue whispering, Yuri lets out a long sigh and asks what the big deal is. Hernando can leave the palace whenever he wants. Hernando replies that going out alone is just considered an outing, but going out with Yuri might seem like rebellion. He then asks if Yuri is planning to do something bad. Yuri denies it and assures him that if he were going to do something bad, it wouldn't be while Hernando is around. Hernando grins and says that's a little disappointing. In Yuri's past life, among the people of Betrayal, there were a few individuals who caused major upheaval. One was the continent's underworld leader. Another was a business titan who built the most successful merchant guild on the continent. And lastly, there was an infamous legendary assassin who took down the underworld's leader and took his place, spreading fear throughout the streets of Betrayal. Yuri believes that the man who was killed by that assassin is the very person he's about to meet, awaiting the arrival of Goryo, the current leader in Betrayal's underworld. Goryo approaches and says it's an honor to welcome such a distinguished guest as Yuri to their establishment. Yuri laughs and asks if Goryo knows who he is. Goryo confirms that he's fully aware that the royal mage and third prince, Yuri, is visiting in person, so it was only right for him to appear as well. Yuri comments that it was a wise decision. Goryo chuckles and invites Yuri to sit so they can talk. A short while later, they move to a private room. As they settle onto the sofas, Hernando leans over and whispers, saying that he is getting nervous. Yuri whispers back, telling Hernando to keep quiet. Goryo sits comfortably. He then asks if Yuri has come to borrow money. Yuri confirms that he has, stating he intends to invest the money he borrows from Goryo. Hearing this, Goryo speculates that Yuri is planning to create a private fund. The fact that Yuri is seeking capital from Goryo instead of a bank suggests he's aiming for something bigger. Yuri interrupts, telling Goryo that interrogating him isn't part of his job. Goryo agrees and immediately apologizes. Yuri tells him not to worry, since he's the one making the request. Goryo nods and gets straight to the point, asking Yuri how he plans to use the funds. Yuri reveals that he plans to purchase Magranja, a specialty spice from the Klein region, with the money he borrows. He explains that demand for the spice will soon far exceed the supply. Hernando grows concerned and asks Yuri what he's talking about, but Goryo becomes intrigued. He acknowledges that Magranja is indeed a key ingredient in luxury fragrances, but he questions whether it's truly worth investing in. Goryo admits he finds the idea somewhat doubtful. Yuri responds firmly, reminding him that he already said the demand will surge soon. Hernando remains anxious, recalling rumors of civil unrest in the Klein Duchy and wandering orcs in the region. Still, he doesn't believe that alone could cause a major spike in spice prices. He wonders if Yuri is simply trying to secure a regional specialty before others do, but the look of resolve on Yuri's face suggests otherwise. Meanwhile, Goryo begins to view Yuri differently. This isn't the same naive third prince people once gossiped about in Betrayal. Yuri seems to know far more than he's revealing. Yuri then shifts the conversation and asks Goryo how much he can borrow, as an investor, not as Betrayal's prince. After some negotiation, Goryo places his hand on the table and slides a promissory note toward Yuri. Yuri laughs and signs it. Later, as they leave the restaurant, Yuri walks while looking at the promissory note. Hernando remarks that Yuri really borrowed a large sum from Goryo and says it's unfair. Yuri is confused at first, but quickly realizes that Hernando is sulking, not because of the money, but because Yuri didn't tell him anything in advance. Yuri laughs and says that if he had told the truth, Hernando might have dragged him straight to his father. Hernando then asks if they're heading to the merchant guild. Yuri replies that they are, because he has a request to make. In truth, Magranja is already a guaranteed profit. The only alchemist who knows how to produce it is a close aide to Duke Klein, and he was the first to die in the Civil War. Until a substitute spice is developed, Magranja will fetch whatever price the market demands. Yuri finally arrives at a dilapidated shop and thinks to himself that he can't entrust something this important to just anyone. He turns to Hernando and tells him they've arrived. Hernando looks at the rundown building in shock, surprised that this is their destination. Yuri walks up to the door and knocks, asking if Elaine Wood is there. Hernando tries to stop him, saying that something like this should be left to an established merchant guild. A woman opens the door and introduces herself as Elaine Wood, asking for their identity. Yuri introduces himself as the third prince, Yuri, and tells her he wants to entrust her with a task. Elaine looks visibly worried upon hearing this. After their discussion ends, Yuri and Hernando begin heading back. Hernando asks if Yuri has lost his mind, but Yuri, clearly irritated, remarks that Hernando seems awfully comfortable speaking so freely to a prince. Hernando lets out a long sigh and says that anyone would react the same way, because Yuri can't possibly expect to buy Mugranja through a business that's barely standing. Yuri, however, believes otherwise. To him, Elaine may be a struggling merchant now, but it won't be long before she becomes known across the continent as the head of a guild no one has ever heard of before. Unlike Goryo, who hides behind a mask of trust, Elaine treats her promises to clients as sacred. Yuri laughs to himself, thinking that while she may have been a legendary merchant in his past life, this time he'll make her a mythical one, someone who surpasses even the legends. Hernando asks if they're finally done, admitting that he's exhausted. But Yuri informs him that there's still one more thing left to do, and without waiting, starts walking again. Hernando tries to stop him, but it's no use. He has no choice but to follow Yuri into a dark alley. Everyone else is already on track to become his ally. He just needs to convince one more person. They enter a back alley where people are sitting on the streets, clearly poor and desperate. As Yuri makes his way through, trying to find someone specific. Eventually, Yuri spots a young blue-haired boy washing clothes alongside other children. He approaches the boy and greets him before introducing himself as the third prince, Yuri. The blue-haired boy looks up in disbelief and asks if Yuri is really the prince. Yuri confirms it. Yuri thinks to himself that the one who once took down Goryo in the past was a surviving member of the Asana assassin order. And this blue-haired child, who seems to be a girl disguised as a boy, looks up at him silently after learning his identity. Asana stands up and asks what the prince is doing in a place like this. Yuri closes his eyes and calmly assures her that there's no need to be so wary. He only came because he thought he could help. Asana listens silently. Yuri then turns to Hernando and tells him to hand it over. Hernando pulls a large bag from his pocket and gives it to Yuri. He glances at the child with blue hair, so similar to Asana's, and wonders if it was because of this child that Asana borrowed money from Goryo in his past life, trying to get the child the treatment she needed. Just like many others who borrowed from Goryo, Asana's life had been ruined. That path eventually led her to become an assassin, one of the most feared and skilled. Now, Yuri's goal is to prevent that fate from unfolding. Yuri tells Asana to take the money and use it to have the temple treat the little girl. Asana accepts it and asks what he wants in return. Yuri replies that he only wants one thing. Once again, he introduces himself as the third prince and tells her to remember his name. After that, Yuri and Hernando begin walking away. Hernando then asks why Yuri gave so much money to a beggar. Without stopping, Yuri tells him that it was an investment for the future. Yuri has now established connections with the people he'll need later. Only one person remains. Suddenly, Yuri stops and tells Hernando that he wants to ask him something. Hernando also halts, and Yuri asks what he saw in the founding king's tomb. Yuri instructs Hernando to keep everything that happened today a secret. The next morning, Hernando meets with Fiore, who had heard that Hernando was out with Yuri the day before. Hernando confirms it, and Fiore asks him to explain what happened. Hernando tells him that Yuri convinced him to leave the palace. Hernando remembers how Yuri borrowed a large amount from Goryo, gave it to a struggling merchant guild, and donated another portion to an orphan. But instead of revealing the truth, Hernando simply tells the king that they walked around the city to observe how the people live, as Yuri was interested in their daily lives. Fiore asks if Yuri returned right after that. Hearing the question, Hernando closes his eyes, nods, and says that's the full report. Fiore accepts the explanation and begins thinking as he looks at Hernando. Then he asks if Hernando is planning to attend the ball. Hernando says that he is. Fiore is surprised, thinking Hernando wasn't interested in such events. Hernando replies that people's minds change, and besides, it's been a while since he danced. The scene shifts to the training ground, where Yuri is sitting on the ground, exhausted after being defeated by Bernard. Despite his fatigue, Yuri notices something and points toward the maids, commenting that Bernard seems to be quite popular. Bernard doesn't understand at first and turns to look. Yuri explains that the maids keep glancing at him. Yuri teases Bernard, saying it looks like he's going to attend the ball. He adds that he's sure people will be waiting to see Bernard there. But Bernard replies that he has no interest in attending and changes the subject. He admits that Yuri was right about the sword technique. No matter how hard he tried, the technique lacks a definitive form. Yuri stands up and reminds Bernard that he already told him this before. Now he just has to move with the flow. Bernard responds that he still doesn't fully understand the mana method, especially since it functions as both a technique and a concept. He says he'll need to see Yuri fight in real combat to study it properly, but it's not going to be easy. After that, Bernard comments that Yuri is improving quickly and is also skilled with mana. He admits honestly that he's surprised. He hadn't expected Yuri to be so adept at handling it. Hearing that, Yuri feels a pang of guilt and swings his sword, thinking that it just happened as a result of trying to erase traces of the Betrayal method he learned in his past life. Bernard advises him not to rush, expressing concern for Yuri's well-being. He explains that Yuri is progressing too fast for someone his age. He's already achieved a great deal, but his body hasn't finished developing yet. Yuri laughs and tells Bernard not to worry, assuring him that he'll maintain a proper balance so they can continue sparring. Bernard asks if he's certain, and Yuri confidently confirms it. He then tosses aside the wooden sword and draws his real blade, suggesting that they start sparring with real swords from now on. Yuri is determined to grow stronger, fast. Bernard draws his sword as well, agreeing to the challenge. Then Yuri proposes a bet. If he manages to land a hit on Bernard, Bernard will have to attend the upcoming ball. Bernard immediately declines. Yuri asks why, prompting Bernard to laugh and say that he's going to win anyway. He adds another reason. Even if Yuri loses, he'd probably nullify the bet, because he has no credibility when it comes to keeping his word. Yuri grows frustrated and retorts that they'll see about that. He then activates his mana method and charges, aiming an attack at Bernard, who blocks it with ease. Yuri declares that he'll defeat Bernard, but in the end, he doesn't succeed. A few days later, on the day of the ball, a carriage approaches the castle. Inside sit two individuals, both with golden hair. The man is the Empire's second prince, George Ivarna Granzan. He comments that his sister hasn't taken her eyes off the window. Princess Katerina, smiling as she watches the scenery of Betrayal, replies that she's simply excited. There's someone she's looking forward to meeting too. Later that night, Aina is preparing a dress for Yuri and asks if he likes it. Yuri looks at the dress, then closes his eyes and says it's too much. All the decorations make it too flashy, and he wants to remove them. Aina replies that the dress looks good to her and reminds Yuri that he used to like things like this. She asks if his taste has changed as well. As Aina fastens the last buttons and begins tidying up, Yuri calls out to her and invites her to dance. He extends his hand, but she doesn't immediately understand. Yuri explains that he wants to practice dancing, but doesn't have anyone else to do it with. Aina becomes flustered and asks if they really have to. Yuri wonders what's behind her strange expression. Aina finally gives him her hand, jokingly asking if he plans to step on her foot to make her fall. Yuri assures her that he's not going to do that and takes her hand, saying he isn't messing with her. Aina blushes as she looks at him, then smiles and teases, asking if he's making fun of her. She proudly declares that she's actually a pretty good dancer. Yuri responds by asking if she dances with someone often. Aina answers playfully that she's quite popular, but she's never danced with someone so short before. Yuri tells her to wait a little longer, because the height difference won't be an issue soon. Aina steps on Yuri's foot, and he points it out. She acts like it was an accident, but Yuri tells her she did it again. He politely smiles and says it's alright, just a mistake. Soon, the scene shifts to the grand hall where musicians are playing, and Fiore sits on his throne and watching Yuri and his other sons. Yuri is chatting with his brothers when he notices Count Sitter entering the hall. Unlike the other knights, Sitter carries a different presence. In the previous meeting, only Baron Arantia had appeared. Yuri turns and glances at his brother's glasses, then asks if his eyesight has gotten worse, since he's been wearing them more often. His brother replies that it's not bad enough to worry about. Suddenly, a loud sound from an announcement horn gathers everyone's attention. The arrival of George and Katerina is announced. George steps into the ballroom and greets Fiore, thanking him for the warm welcome. Fiore replies courteously. George then gestures toward his sister, introducing Princess Katerina. Yuri is shocked. Katerina greets Fiore with a warm smile, and seeing her instantly brings back memories from his past life, when he shared meaningful moments with her, all of which were shattered by her eventual betrayal. Yuri grows anxious. He knows he mustn't build rapport with her again, but he's also determined not to repeat the same mistakes. While Fiore, Yuri's brother, and George engage in conversation, Katerina spots Yuri and smiles brightly at him. Meanwhile, Yuri continues speaking with his brothers and laughing as he eats cookies. His attention turns to Cedric, admiring how he treats others kindly without prejudice, a true quality of a benevolent lord. Many girls at the ball are clearly taken by Cedric's charm. Yuri silently compares himself to Cedric. While lost in thought, he senses someone approaching. It's Katerina. She walks toward him, but before reaching him, she's called away by Yuri's older brother. Yuri curses himself, wondering why he would even think about getting close to someone tied to such painful memories. His mood lifts when Aina appears and asks if he wants some cookies. Yuri thanks her, and she sets a tray on the table. He then asks if her work is tiring. Aina responds that it's not, then teasingly says it's nothing compared to taking care of someone she knows. Yuri gets the message and tells her to give him a lot of cookies. Aina picks up the tray and starts walking away, telling him to let her know if he wants more. Yuri thanks her and exhales. But just then, George approaches, and Yuri immediately becomes alert. He recognizes the man as George, the second prince of the empire, the one who led troops in place of the emperor. Yuri introduces himself, fully aware that George is the man who would one day bring Betrayal to ruin. He tries his best to stay composed, knowing he cannot show hostility openly. George observes him and releases a subtle but powerful aura, causing Yuri to break into a cold sweat. While asserting his presence, George asks if Yuri is now 13, then compliments him as the son of Fiore. After that, George walks away, casually remarking that Yuri seems to have some talent. Yuri clenches his fists in frustration. For someone who just came to test him, George's presence was threatening. He knows he's still young, but he can't believe George is already that strong. Suddenly, George bumps into Aina, causing her to drop her tray. The room goes quiet as whispers spread, with people remarking that staining the imperial symbol is a serious offense. Aina trembles in fear and quickly apologizes. George laughs coldly and draws his sword, stating that she's committed a grave mistake. He points the blade at her and declares that, according to the rules of the crown, the only fitting punishment is death. Yuri's anger boils over. Fiore steps forward and asks if George is trying to disrupt his ball. Hearing that, George apologizes and sheaths his sword, stating that Betrayal and the Empire have maintained mutual respect until now. Fiore confirms that, though George's actions show a lack of respect, George then asks if Fiore remembers Gatintia when Fiore taken down a knight of the Empire, and the Emperor chose to respect Fiore's honor instead of demanding retribution. George places a hand on his sword and says this is a similar situation. He is acting to preserve peace and honor between both nations. Yuri also recalls that, in the past, Fiore did indeed kill an imperial knight. George continues, saying he takes no pleasure in this and suggests they resolve the matter quickly. Fiore grows increasingly concerned, realizing that George invoking this past event means Betrayal's honor is now at stake. Yuri stands there, knowing that stopping George now would be seen as challenging the Empire. Necessity and circumstance, ideals and reality, reason and power. Despite all of this, Betrayal never abandons its honor. That is the oath of Betrayal. Yuri decides to act. He walks toward George and tells him that Aina is his maid, hoping to defuse the situation. Yuri explains that since she serves him, her wrongdoings are his responsibility. He adds that, as a prince himself, George should take that into account. Yuri thinks back on his past life, remembering that he was a criminal and this life is the sentence he was given to repent. It means he never had a choice to begin with. He then requests that George withdraw his decision and instead consider resolving the matter through a duel. George laughs and agrees to the terms. He confirms Yuri's name and begins addressing him informally. The crowd is shocked by the sudden turn of events. George turns to Fiore and says that Yuri made a reasonable suggestion and he intends to accept it, asking if Fiore is also in agreement. Fiore has no choice but to accept. George thanks him, then tells Yuri he will be his opponent in the duel, but for the sake of dignity, he'll use a proxy. He decides to select the youngest member of the royal guard, since Yuri is also young. Yuri bows and thanks him. George leaves the ballroom, stating he'll see Yuri on the day of the duel. Afterward, Yuri calls for Aina, who is still trembling. She softly calls his name, and he tells her to rest, She begins to cry, and Yuri gently comforts her, telling her not to worry about him. Other maids come to help Aina and guide her away to rest. Yuri starts walking around the hall but bumps into Katerina, who is eating sweets. He quickly turns away, dismissing his thoughts, and continues walking while Hernando watches him silently. The scene shifts to Yuri walking down a hallway where Cedric is standing. Cedric asks what Yuri was thinking during that incident. Yuri turns and replies that he simply couldn't let George kill Aina. Cedric is impressed by Yuri's response and pats his head. Yuri realizes it has been a long time since someone did that. Cedric then offers help, warning that the opponent Yuri will face is likely to be strong. He explains that while George made it seem like he was being fair, the truth is quite the opposite. Since both fighters are close in age, even if something serious were to happen, it would be considered acceptable within the trial. Yuri replies that he already knows what Cedric is trying to say. Hearing that, Cedric decides not to explain further and says he'll handle things if needed. But Yuri declines the offer. He wants to settle this on his own. Cedric understands Yuri's determination and chooses to trust him. Yuri is happy to hear that and asks what's happening back at the ball. Cedric explains that things are a bit chaotic but assures Yuri that he'll take care of it, urging him to rest. He returns to the ball, and Yuri quietly thanks him. Yuri thinks to himself that if the kingdom hadn't fallen in his past life, he's certain Cedric would have ruled Betrayal. But now, in this life, he is determined to see what kind of kingdom Cedric will build. To witness that future, Yuri decides he must fight, no matter who he has to face. The next morning, Yuri and his opponent arrive at the training ground for the duel. Spectators, including George, Katerina, Fiore, Hernando, and Sand, are present. Hernando turns to Sand and asks what he thinks about the duel. Sand replies that the opponent's energy is very stable and that he is highly skilled with the sword, despite not yet being a knight. Sand concludes that the Empire's guard is formidable. He wonders whether Yuri will be alright, then notices Hernando smiling. Curious, he asks why. Hernando nods toward Yuri, who is stretching and yawning confidently. Hernando comments that Sand probably doesn't need to worry about Yuri at all. Grand Wizard is a rank that no ordinary mage can reach. Among all the titles granted within the Magic Tower, it stands above all. It is only awarded to someone who has obtained origin magic. Among its disciplines, the ultimate magic capable of glimpsing into the fate of the world is known as fate-revealing magic. In this world, only one person has ever reached that level, Hernando. But when it came to Yuri, he couldn't see anything. Instead, he saw a vision, an illusion of a mountain of swords. At the summit stood a boy with black hair and eyes, the unmistakable symbols of the Betrayal family. His gaze was proud, arrogant, yet he never stopped swinging his sword. He refused to fall. The vision ended with the boy collapsing in despair. Perhaps that moment was where it all truly began. The story Hernando once dismissed as a coincidence began revolving around a single focal point. After witnessing Yuri's unpredictable behavior during their recent outing, Hernando became convinced that the miracle of fate-revealing magic was truly at work. He began to believe that Yuri was a person born without destiny. Now, returning to the present, Hernando is smiling, and Sand asks why. Hernando simply assures him that there's no need to worry. Yuri tells his opponent that he's ready and asks how long he plans to keep swinging his sword in the air. Hearing that, George turns to his guard and asks if he needs more time to prepare. Yuri responds that he's ready at any moment, and the opponent agrees as well. With both fighters prepared, Fiore announces the beginning of the trial by combat. The duel begins. Both warriors step forward and take their stances. The moment the signal is given, Yuri moves first, fast and aggressive, striking his opponent. But the opponent doesn't fall. The match continues. They exchange attacks rapidly, each movement met with a dodge, a block, or a swift step back. The intensity builds as neither side gives in. While observing the fight, Fiore turns to Hernando and asks what he thinks will happen. Hernando looks at Yuri, still striking, dodging, flowing through every motion, and smiles faintly. He replies that he doesn't know the outcome. Fiore asks another question, reminding Hernando that he once said his arrival in Betrayal was guided by the heavens. Hernando confirms it. Fiore then asks if the time for his departure has come. Hernando shakes his head and replies that it hasn't yet. Fiore is relieved, saying he's glad to hear Hernando will remain. Hernando laughs and says that Fiore has already honored a common mage like him far too much. He's humbled by it. Fiore remarks that excessive modesty might bring misfortune and asks if that means nothing major will go wrong. Hernando, changing the subject slightly, asks Fiore who he thinks is stronger, Yuri or his opponent. Fiore glances at Yuri's opponent and replies that the opponent is stronger. Hernando feels disheartened by that answer, commenting that it seems Fiore thinks so as well. When Hernando first came to Betrayal, it was purely because of signs from the heavens. Those signs told him that the one who could alter the fate of the world, the continent's strongest, would be found there. But the sword hadn't yet been drawn, and he believed he had no reason to stay. Hernando admits to Fiore that he once thought his time in Betrayal was over. But after witnessing Yuri's sudden change, he started to believe that the time hadn't come. Not yet. Meanwhile, Yuri forges his sword with the mana method, determined to bring the match to an end. His opponent notices something unusual. Yuri suddenly becomes faster. Moving like a flash of light, Yuri charges, goes to strike at his opponent's head. The opponent closes his eyes, fully expecting death. George, Katerina, Fiore, and the crowd all react in shock, but Yuri stopped his sword at the last moment, sparing his opponent. The opponent drops his sword and admits defeat. Hernando smiles, satisfied with the outcome. Yuri smiles, and the entire training ground erupts with cheers. Hernando reflects that he came chasing the will of the heavens, and now he has met someone who defied it. Even George begins to cheer for Yuri, impressed by the duel. At the tip of the third prince's sword, Hernando feels that the fate once given to the attendant has shifted, just like the boy himself. In Hernando's eyes, Yuri's every step now defies the will of the heavens. Saint is overjoyed. He smiles while the soldiers around him cheer, clap, and chant Yuri's name. They all hope for his continued success. Hernando watches quietly, and in that moment, he begins to understand. Yuri is different. He is not like others. He exists outside the bounds of ordinary fate. Hernando realizes that Yuri is truly the one who can transcend destiny. Now, 5 years have passed. In the mansion's hallway, a maid is running hurriedly, wondering why things had been going so smoothly until now. She is in such a rush because she accidentally mixed up her assigned area, and if someone catches her right now, it will be very bad for her. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happens. Someone calls out to the maid and asks if she's new there. The person is Yuri's brother. The maid notices his black hair and the royal emblem of Betrayal on his attire. Yuri's brother asks what she's doing there at this hour. She hesitates to reply, trying to calm herself and remember how her seniors taught her to respond in such situations. Seeing her stand silently makes Yuri's brother grow irritated, and he repeats his question. The maid then recalls her senior's advice. If someone always has a dull, emotionless expression, that person must be His Majesty. They also told her that the crown prince greets others with a gentle smile, so this man definitely isn't him. The maid notices his sharp eyes and slightly crooked steps. Yuri's brother grows even angrier and asks if she's seriously ignoring him. Flustered, the maid blurts out that he must be the third prince. Yuri's brother looks confused upon hearing that. The maid hurriedly adds that she has to be somewhere else, but Yuri's brother interrupts, asking if the servants have a manual on how to deal with the royals, and if it says in there that they should avoid him. The maid becomes extremely nervous, unable to think of a reply. Seeing that, Yuri's brother becomes furious and declares that he'll educate them all today. Just then, Yuri steps in and asks what his brother is up to this time. The maid looks at Yuri and remembers what her seniors said about another person. If she sees someone with a confident expression and a sword at his side, that's the third prince. Yuri approaches and asks his brother if he's bothering a maid again. The scene then shifts. Yuri is walking down the hallway, eating delicious cookies while watching the fountain. The same maid from before approaches him and offers more cookies as thanks for saving her earlier. Yuri compliments her, saying the food she made was quite delicious. After finishing the cookies, he cleans his hands and gazes at them thoughtfully, thinking about the unarmed realm, a state where, even while holding a sword, one can reduce the pressure on the hand through the use of mana. It seems that Yuri has now reached that level. It has been 5 years since he regressed. After being struck down by Laurent's sword, he woke up again in his younger days. Yuri puts on his gloves, realizing that his peaceful days are soon coming to an end, and comments that they're probably running their mouths right now. It turns out he's referring to the meeting of the dukes. Yuri knocks on the door of the conference room, where people inside are busy arguing with one another. He keeps knocking, but no one responds. The guard, growing nervous, suggests that Yuri try knocking again, explaining that no one seems to hear him because they're so focused on their discussion. Annoyed, Yuri channels his strength and strikes the door, breaking it open. The guard is shocked, and everyone in the conference room freezes in fear as the door suddenly bursts open. Yuri apologizes calmly, saying that he knocked, but no one seemed to hear, so he used more force the second time. The guard collapses to the floor in worry, muttering about how Yuri could possibly call that a knock. Yuri then turns to his father and requests permission to join the conference. His father nods in acceptance. Yuri takes a seat at the table and tells everyone to continue. A golden-haired man clears his throat and begins to speak, stating that they have no spare troops to send to support the Allied forces. Another duke, clearly displeased, questions whether the golden-haired man intends to ignore the Empire's request. The golden-haired man simply ignores the challenge and continues, saying that in that case, the other nobles may heed the request instead. The brown-haired duke slams his hand on the table, calling the previous statement an irresponsible remark. Both dukes continue arguing with each other while Yuri silently observes them, thinking about how everyone is only considering their own gains and losses. That's right. It was around this time that the incident occurred in Yuri's past life. The Empire's call to join the Allied forces. The Empire had requested troops from various nations to launch a large-scale campaign against an orc invasion in the east. However, the Allied forces ultimately failed, and in their fury, the orcs retaliated fiercely, putting immense pressure on the borders of all participating nations. They attacked every nation except the Empire. That's when Yuri realized that everything had been orchestrated by the Empire from the very beginning. In the process, many outstanding knights who had joined the Allied forces lost their lives, including Lien. But this time, Yuri won't allow things to unfold that way again. The brown-haired man declares his final decision, that they will not send anyone, and that's final. Hearing that, the brown-haired duke stands up in anger, asking if he thinks they have an endless supply of knights, and tells him to at least show some dignity. Suddenly, Yuri tells everyone to stop. He announces that he himself will join the Allied forces and urges the others to show sincerity and fulfill their noble duty so that the name of Betrayal is not brought to shame. Yuri's father smiles upon hearing that, understanding the move Yuri intends to make. Later, in the training grounds, Yuri is practicing with Bernard when his brother arrives and waves at him. Yuri's brother looks exhausted and asks if he is seriously planning to join the Allied forces. Yuri confirms that he is. His brother questions why Yuri would go when there's no real need for him to do so. Hearing that, Yuri asks if his brother remembers what he always says, that it is simply the duty of royalty. Yuri's brother laughs and replies that today, he finally understands Yuri's mindset. Yuri looks a bit confused at his words. His brother's eyes glimmer as he tells Yuri to come back safely, promising that in the meantime, he will protect the palace. After saying that, he runs off, leaving the training ground. Watching him go, Bernard comments on how strong their brotherly bond seems. Yuri smiles faintly, thinking that he would be very relieved if his brother could just stay out of trouble. Then Yuri asks Bernard if he isn't going to worry about him. Bernard replies that as long as Yuri doesn't do anything reckless, he believes Yuri will return safely. Yuri thanks him for his confidence, but Bernard still warns him to be careful of the orcs, as they are difficult to handle. Bernard advises that the orcs are far stronger and more cunning than Yuri might expect, especially those carrying a flag on their backs. They are called orcfuls, and they are particularly fierce and powerful, even among the orcs. Yuri reassures Bernard not to worry since he has his own methods. Bernard then asks if he has a specific plan. Just then, Aina bursts into the training ground, calling out for Yuri and informing him that a guest has arrived with something he ordered. Yuri turns to Bernard and confirms that he does have a plan, and of course, it's a very special one. In the guest room, Elaine Merchant Guild's vice president, Guillermo, is sipping his tea. The moment Yuri enters, Guillermo immediately stands up to greet him. Yuri casually sits on the sofa and asks Guillermo about Elaine. Guillermo also takes a seat and explains that Elaine is currently on the road, so he is here as her substitute. Yuri realizes that Elaine is still traveling and instructs Guillermo to tell her to tone it down a little. Guillermo replies that Elaine says it's simply what she does best. Yuri then asks if that's the only reason Guillermo is here. Hearing that, Guillermo smiles and pulls out a box, explaining that there's another reason. He's brought the item Yuri mentioned last time. Yuri compliments Guillermo for his hard work and opens the box, thinking that he's finally acquired the four-wheel blade. Guillermo, curious, asks if it's really that valuable because, to him, they just look like decorative daggers. Yuri confirms that they are indeed valuable, explaining that they are artifacts imbued with ancient magic. Yuri then channels his mana to make the dagger move, which shocks Guillermo so much that his eyes widen in disbelief. Yuri tells the frightened Guillermo not to worry, it's completely safe. Guillermo asks if Yuri is really moving it with his mana and admits that he didn't know Yuri was that strong. Realizing this is a completely different way of using mana. Yuri asks if Guillermo really thought he spent his days fooling around. Suddenly, Yuri senses something, and his expression changes. Guillermo notices and asks if something is wrong. Yuri replies calmly that everything is fine and tells him to pass along his greetings to Elaine. Then, Yuri instructs Guillermo to report on the Empire Branch's progress next time. Guillermo stands up, accepts the order, and decides to leave. After Guillermo departs, Yuri sits back comfortably and calls out for Asana to come out. She emerges from the shadows, and Yuri asks about Goryo's situation. Asana reports that she delivered the warning to Goryo just as Yuri instructed, leaving a message on his bedside. Yuri praises her for doing a good job, commenting that Goryo keeps trying to go after Elaine's money. Asana then asks if it's true that Yuri plans to join the Allied forces. She overheard the servants talking about it. Yuri confirms that he is indeed joining. Hearing that, Asana warns him to be careful. Yuri replies that she's making it sound like he's going alone, which confuses her. She asks what he means, and Yuri reveals that she'll be coming with him, if she can keep up. Asana smiles politely and says that anywhere is better than where she came from. Yuri tells her to leave for now, saying that he'll contact her again later. A few days later, the day of departure arrives. Yuri is preparing to leave when his elder brother approaches and politely tells him to take care. Yuri assures him not to worry, claiming that he's invincible and will uphold the honor of Brooks. Then, Yuri reminds his brother to take breaks while studying and to take care of his eyes. His brother laughs, agrees with Yuri's advice, and smiles, telling him that they'll meet again soon. He hugs Yuri, and feeling the warmth of that embrace, Yuri replies that he'll come back. The soldiers blow the alarm, signaling that departure time is near. Yuri's father steps forward to deliver a speech before the troops, proceeding with the ceremony. Yuri walks onto the stage and stands beside his father. His father asks if he's nervous, but with full confidence, Yuri replies that he isn't nervous at all. His father then tells him to look behind. When Yuri turns around, he sees all the soldiers standing before him. His father advises him that these are precious lives now entrusted to his command. Yuri understands that not all of them will return home alive. However, he silently vows that none of them will meet a tragic fate like in his previous life. His father asks once more if he's sure he can handle it. Yuri meets his father's eyes and firmly replies that of course he can. But before he can finish, his father releases his powerful aura and tells Yuri to endure it. Yuri starts sweating, feeling the immense pressure, his body frozen in place. The presence surrounding him feels like certain death. Instinctively, Yuri realizes that if he tries to evade it, he will perish, but wonders if he can resist it somehow. Then, suddenly, blue mana begins to gather around him. Regaining movement, Yuri draws his sword and attacks. His father blocks the strike effortlessly but smiles with satisfaction, praising Yuri's strength. Yuri looks down at his trembling hands clutching the sword. His father says that this will serve as his letter of departure. Then, he sheathes his sword, choosing not to prolong the test, and instructs Yuri to come back alive. Yuri firmly replies yes. He then turns to the assembled troops, raises his sword high, and commands their attention. Introducing himself as Briol's third prince, Yuri tells them to place their trust in him. His words ignite the soldiers' morale as he gives the order to march. The scene then shifts to a dim underground facility where orcs are imprisoned. A silver-haired figure stands before them and quietly remarks that he will be meeting Yuri again soon. The troop stops in the forest to rest. There, Yuri sits with the other soldiers, drinking water, and then stands up to ask Sir Raymond how long they've been traveling, commenting that it feels quite far. Looking at the map, Sir Raymond informs Yuri that they are at the brink of Sitter and will be arriving there soon. After that, Raymond explains that they intend to cross through Jid into Balshid. Hearing the route, Yuri comments that their pace seems fine. Raymond agrees with Yuri's assessment. Suddenly, another soldier calls out to Yuri, addressing him as the third prince. Yuri turns back, but the moment he does, he remembers Laurent Flandre from his past life, the man who once claimed that everything happened because of Yuri, and who was also the one who killed him back then. Laurent is the eldest son of Count Francis. Humbly, Laurent steps forward, greets Yuri, and introduces himself. Yuri is surprised and responds briefly, prompting Laurent to lift his head and say that he has wanted to tell Yuri something for a long time. Yuri, a bit uneasy, asks what it is. With bright eyes, Laurent tells Yuri that he has always admired him. Yuri is stunned to hear that. Laurent continues, saying that ever since he heard from his father what happened 5 years ago, Yuri has been his idol. Laurent's father told him about how Yuri stood his ground, raised his sword to defend his servant. To Laurent, that was the true code of a knight. Yuri is taken aback by this unexpected side of Laurent. He gestures for Laurent to stand and tells him that he's heard about him from his father as well, before greeting him back. Laurent immediately stands up and says that the honor is his, clearly delighted, and then moves on happily. Raymond approaches and informs Yuri that it's time to depart again. Before leaving, he gives Yuri a heads up, saying that Count Sitter is not the friendliest man, so Yuri shouldn't take it personally if they aren't greeted warmly. As night falls, at Count Sitter's border, the walls are lit brightly to welcome the third prince. Yuri and his troops arrive, and Yuri gasps softly, commenting that it's quite a warm welcome. Raymond, on the other hand, looks shocked. Count Heim Sitter steps forward and bows to greet Prince Yuri. Yuri dismounts from his horse and thanks Sitter for the warm reception. Sitter replies that he merely admires Yuri's courage for stepping onto the front lines at such a young age, and then asks if Yuri has fought orcs before. Yuri accidentally lets slip that he has, but quickly corrects himself, saying that rather than fighting, he has studied them. Yuri explains that most of his troops have never faced orcs, so he thought it wise to study their behavior in advance. Sitter commends Yuri's resolve and then bows, asking if Yuri will accept his gift. The scene then shifts to an underground facility. A guard opens the gate, and Sitter leads Yuri and his men inside. Yuri is accompanied by Hernando and several guards. After everyone enters, Sitter suddenly closes the door, surprising the soldiers. Yuri, however, remains calm and asks Sitter what this means. Sitter steps forward, lights the fire pots, and assures Yuri there's no reason to be alarmed. They soon see someone imprisoned in the dimly lit room. The soldiers become uneasy, but Yuri recognizes the growling sound. It belongs to an orc. Sitter refers to it as a captive and explains that they've been studying orcs closely to learn everything about them, from their small habits to their instincts, anything that could be useful in battle. Hearing this, Yuri asks if this captive is the gift Sitter mentioned earlier. Sitter confirms, saying that since they are about to go to war, he believes there's no greater gift than an orc to study. Yuri smiles and thanks Sitter, though inwardly he thinks Sitter is far more unhinged than he expected, since he's resorting to keeping an orc captive. Yuri then glances at the frightened faces of the soldiers behind him and turns to one of them, asking his name. The soldier introduces himself as Simon Fesch, son of Baron Bolf. Yuri asks Simon what he's thinking right now. Simon admits that he feels they've gone too far, that this treatment seems excessive for a prisoner of war. Yuri agrees, saying Simon might think that now, and then orders Sitter to open one of the orc cages. Sitter complies. Yuri tells Simon that this will be real combat practice, and he must face the orc. One of the orcs steps out of the cage, and Simon draws his sword while the others watch. As Simon prepares to attack, the orc suddenly lowers its head, appearing to beg for mercy. Seeing that, Simon hesitates and tells Yuri that he can't fight a helpless captive. But the moment Simon turns his back, the orc lunges forward and strikes him hard, knocking him down. The orc grabs Simon, appearing to take him hostage. The other soldiers panic, ready to attack, but Sitter quickly tells them to relax. Standing beside Yuri, Sitter remarks that this is what orcs truly are. If you show them even a hint of weakness, they'll immediately try to take advantage of it. The other soldiers shout, begging Yuri to save Simon. Sitter tells them to calm down, explaining that he has already damaged about half of the orc's tendons, so Simon won't die. though he might get a little hurt. Observing the orc's behavior, Yuri asks if it's trying to hold Simon hostage. Sitter replies that he will call for an interpreter and summons a shabby-looking half-orc named Corey. Seeing him, Yuri looks puzzled. Corey begins to interpret the orc's language. He translates that the orc is demanding everyone lower their weapons immediately, otherwise it will harm the knight. As soon as Corey finishes translating, the orc strikes Simon, causing him to cry out in pain. Yuri immediately calls out to Hernando, telling him that it's his turn to act. Hernando steps forward, channels his magic, and launches an attack to distract the orc. In that instant, Yuri charges forward, praising Hernando's teamwork, and rescues Simon in a flash before retreating to a safe distance. The orc roars in frustration. Analyzing the situation, Yuri notes that the orc doesn't seem ordinary. Sitter confirms this, saying that although it's small in stature, it has considerable battle experience. Sitter then reveals that when the orc was captured, it had been attacking a knight, and that it was responsible for many similar incidents. The soldiers become enraged, and one of them, overcome with fury, declares that he'll take down the orc right there, prisoner or not. Yuri calmly tells the soldier to hold on. The soldier insists, but Yuri clarifies that he isn't stopping him. Instead, he tells the soldier to look behind the orc. Yuri points out that the others are waiting for an opportunity, meaning this orc isn't the only dangerous one. If they were to move into the plains, they would encounter even more like it. He advises the soldiers to focus on training and learning how to properly handle orcs instead of acting rashly. Gerard steps forward, channels mana through his sword, and faces the orc with the others for combat training. Suddenly, the orc grabs a fire pot and hurls it toward the soldiers with all its strength. Hernando reacts quickly, blocking the attack with his magic while Yuri and Sitter watch attentively. One of the knights seizes the moment, charging at the orc and landing a clean strike on its shoulder, taking it down. Yuri claps and commends their skill, saying their teamwork is impressive, though the soldiers' expressions tell a different story. Seeing their uneasy faces, Yuri asks if they're feeling unwell and admits that it's understandable. But the experience will help raise their survival chances in future battles. He advises them to be thankful to Sitter for arranging it. Sitter then addresses the group, saying that while the knights may think such training goes against their ideals, they must remember that these creatures show no mercy. Sitter explains that what they've seen so far are mere imitations, and in the orc villages, far worse things occur. Yuri asks Sitter if he truly despises the orcs. Sitter's expression darkens, and he says that he will hate them until the day he dies. Hearing this, Yuri realizes that Sitter speaks with the calm of someone long accustomed to chaos. Yuri knows everyone carries a sworn enemy. For him, it's the Empire. For Sitter, it's the orcs. Yuri also recalls that Sitter's son was killed by orc, a memory that clearly still haunts him. Just as Yuri can never forget the downfall of his own kingdom. The next day dawns, and Yuri and the knights prepare to depart. Before they leave, Sitter stops Yuri and suggests that he take Corey along. Yuri remembers him from the previous night, commenting that he's the one from the basement. Sitter repeats Corey's name, and Yuri acknowledges that he's a valuable asset since he can speak the orc language. Corey looks anxious and tries to say something to Yuri, but Yuri stops him gently, saying that he already understands his worries and that there's no need to be afraid. Yuri then hands Corey a pair of gauntlets, telling him to consider it a token of goodwill for future cooperation. Corey becomes nervous, feeling unworthy of such a valuable gift, but Yuri brushes it off and summons Raymond, asking if there are any borderlands beyond this point. Raymond confirms and warns that there may be some bandits, but reassures Yuri that the risk of attack is low. Yuri disagrees, saying that bandits are no different from orcs. Both are threats to the borderlands, and declares that they'll wipe them out to ensure safety. The scene then shifts to the forest, where a group of travelers is passing through. Suddenly, they're ambushed by bandits. The leader, mounted on horseback, ruthlessly attacks the travelers, leaving devastation in his wake. Yuri and his knights have now entered the forest. Looking back, Yuri observes Corey and Hernando. If it were to become known that Corey is a half-orc, it could cause a stir within the unit. But since Yuri personally assigned him as an attendant, he is confident that Hernando will handle things properly. Yuri then studies the map and calls for Gerard. Hearing his name, Gerard quickly spurs his horse forward to speak with Yuri. Yuri instructs him to act as a scout and investigate the marked location immediately. Gerard grows nervous, realizing he's been assigned scouting duty, and insists that the area belongs to the bandits. He explains that if their unit gives chase, the bandits will simply flee, so there's no real need to engage them. Yuri disagrees, saying they will pursue and capture the bandits since they are the ones attacking merchant caravans near the border. He then teases Gerard, asking if he's lacking confidence despite being such a skilled swordsman. Yuri's words sting, but they also ignite Gerard's pride. Yuri adds that the other knights are too tense to rely on, and while he himself may be just a young and inexperienced prince, Gerard is a sword genius, yet still can't seem to understand criminals. Hearing that, Gerard straightens up and quickly agrees, saying he'll scout ahead and return soon. Yuri smiles and nods, pleased with Gerard's renewed enthusiasm. After Gerard leaves, Raymond rides up beside Yuri's horse, commenting that Yuri seems to care deeply about his friend. Acting humble, Yuri replies that he's just dragging Gerard along. Then, turning to Raymond, Yuri asks if he can pose a simple question. Raymond nods, so Yuri asks him why he fights. Raymond's expression changes. It's been a long time since anyone has asked him that, but his answer remains the same. Yuri listens quietly as Raymond tells him that he fights only for Briolle's peace. Yuri smiles, genuinely moved by the sincerity of that answer, calling it a truly honorable reason. He then instructs Raymond to maintain the marching pace while he checks on Gerard's progress. Meanwhile, at the bandits' hideout, Yuri and Gerard have captured one of the bandits for interrogation. The bandit tries to shout, but Yuri calmly tells him to stay quiet if he values his life. The bandit trembles as he sees the dagger in Yuri's hand. Gerard, still observing the hideout from a distance, informs Yuri that he's found the enemy's main base. Yuri praises Gerard, but looks suspicious, wondering why the captured bandit was scouting alone instead of in a group. Yuri asks the bandit if his boss really sent him out by himself. The bandit hesitates, but then confirms that his boss did. As Yuri continues questioning him, he notices a reddish necklace around the bandit's neck. He grabs the bandit's shirt, pulls out the necklace, and asks if it belongs to him. The bandit shakes his head, claiming that their boss gave it to him to wear while on patrol. Yuri draws his sword slightly and asks what kind of magic is imbued in the necklace, as it appears to be an artifact. The bandit panics and swears that he doesn't know anything about it. Yuri believes he's telling the truth and concludes that they'll have to capture the bandit leader to get answers. As the sun begins to set, Yuri uses field glasses to survey the area. Gerard and the other knights return, reporting that they've positioned troops along the predicted escape routes exactly as ordered and sent scouts to monitor internal movements. Yuri praises their efforts and says that if they can create confusion within the hideout, capturing the bandits will be simple. Gerard, confused, asks how they're going to cause that confusion. Yuri doesn't answer. Instead, he mounts his horse and says, "Let's go. If you're late, you get nothing," leaving Gerard and the others stunned. Gerard shouts for him to wait, saying it's too dangerous to go alone, but Yuri ignores him and orders the troops to charge. The bandits, caught off guard, panic as they realize the army is advancing on them. Yuri bursts into the hideout, landing right on the table where the bandits were eating. He smiles casually and greets them. By nightfall, Gerard and the others finally arrive at the hideout, exhausted from running, only to find that Yuri has already defeated the bandits and is calmly cooking a meal for himself. Seeing them, Yuri chuckles and says, "You're late." Gerard, frustrated, asks why Yuri always acts alone even though it's dangerous. Yuri replies by asking why they didn't follow him faster, wondering aloud why he's always the one being scolded. The bandit leader, who was pretending to be dead, tries to move unnoticed. Yuri asks Raymond for a report on those who escaped. Raymond confirms that all the bandits have been taken care of and that there were no casualties among the knights. Satisfied, Yuri orders the knights to collect the bandits' supplies and prepare dinner. Tonight's meal will be fried meat skewers. As the knights prepare, the bandit leader assumes no one is watching and tries to crawl away. Meanwhile, Raymond informs Yuri about their next destination, Gide. Before that, however, they'll pass through Balsard, where the Allied forces are gathering. Raymond explains that they'll likely encounter troops from another kingdom along the way since their routes overlap. Sensing the bandit leader's movement, Yuri swiftly kicks him aside and calmly continues the conversation, asking Raymond which kingdom's troops they'll meet. Raymond replies that it's the Holy Kingdom, a nation known for its sacred arts. Yuri says that's good news. If they stay on friendly terms, the Holy Kingdom's healers might help the knights later. Raymond, however, looks uneasy and warns that it's not guaranteed. He explains that the commander of the Allied army is a princess from the Holy Kingdom who is currently on the losing side of a political struggle. To secure her position, she's desperate to achieve results, and rumors suggest she may go to any lengths to succeed. Yuri begins thinking deeply after hearing about the princess of the Holy Kingdom. Seeing this, Raymond asks if he should investigate further, but Yuri tells him there's no need. He'll meet her directly instead. Jid, a midway stop on the route to Balshad, the rallying point of the Alliance army, is responsible for supplying materials to the Allied forces. Yuri reminds everyone that if Briol's soldiers cause any trouble here, it could cost them their lives. Any violation of Jid's laws would be punished under military code, so he instructs the soldiers to keep that firmly in mind. As an independent region, Jid requires all visitors to follow its internal rules. After stationing his troops outside the city, Yuri reinforces discipline among them and orders Raymond to train all the knights before sending them in. Once preparations are complete, Yuri decides to personally visit the city's lord. Upon arrival, the lord, a white-haired elderly man, warmly greets him, saying it is an honor to meet Prince Yuri of Briol. Yuri thanks the old man for the gracious welcome and expresses gratitude for Jid's cooperation on behalf of Briol. The old man assures him that they will do their best to ensure the Alliance army's success. He then compliments Yuri's father's achievements against the orcs in his youth and remarks that now, with Yuri himself here, the orcs must surely be trembling. Yuri smiles and humbly replies that he will do his best to live up to those expectations. At that moment, the Lord's butler enters the room and addresses him quietly. The old man notices and gestures for him to approach. The butler leans in and whispers something in his ear while Yuri silently watches. The old man then turns to Yuri and informs him that the princess of the Holy Kingdom has also arrived, asking if Yuri would like to meet her. Yuri agrees to do so. After a short while, the princess of the Holy Kingdom enters the room, accompanied by 2 guards. As she arrives, the old man stands to greet her, but Yuri remains seated. She is the second princess of the Holy Kingdom, Sibylla Arshant. She introduces herself to the old man, who bows respectfully and says it is an honor to meet Her Highness in such a modest place. Then Sibylla turns her gaze toward Yuri, who is still seated, and asks if he is one of the Lord's servants. Yuri is momentarily confused but doesn't respond. Sibylla continues, telling Yuri that she and the Lord have something important to discuss, and politely asks him to leave for a moment. The old man grows visibly worried and tries to intervene, but before he can speak, one of Sibylla's guards steps forward and sternly warns Yuri for remaining seated while Her Highness is addressing him. Yuri smiles calmly and says that he is the 3rd prince of Briol. His words leave all 3 of them stunned, and the atmosphere instantly becomes awkward. Yuri adds that, if they look carefully, they'll also notice that he is leading Briol's army. The guard, realizing his mistake, grows pale and tries to excuse himself, but Yuri lightly jokes that it's his own fault. He should have dressed more elegantly instead of wearing something that makes him look like a common soldier. The guards, flustered, immediately bow and apologize for their rudeness. Sibylla exhales softly, trying to ease the tension. While sipping his tea, Yuri turns to the old man and asks if he looks shabby in this attire. The old man laughs heartily, assuring him that's not true at all. Sibylla, sitting beside Yuri, apologizes for the misunderstanding and politely asks him to let it go. Hearing that, Yuri smiles and reintroduces himself properly, extending his hand for a handshake. Sibylla accepts, and they greet each other formally. Yuri then asks about her age, and Sibylla tells him she is 20 years old. Yuri grins and replies that he is 18, pointing out that there's only a 2-year difference between them, meaning they can consider each other friends. He cheerfully tells her that she can speak informally with him and says it's nice to meet her. Sibylla is caught off guard by his casual tone, while the old man finds the exchange heartwarming, saying it's encouraging to see such camaraderie between allies preparing to face the fierce orcs. Yuri asks Sibylla once more if it's all right with her, and she nods in agreement. He then continues, mentioning that he didn't see any Holy Kingdom troops on his way here, and asks if only her knight order has arrived so far. Sibylla confirms that he's correct. Her troops are expected to arrive tomorrow. Yuri sighs lightly, saying he hopes nothing has gone wrong. However, Sibylla misinterprets his words and quickly responds that the Holy Kingdom maintains strict military discipline, asking if Yuri truly believes something might happen. Yuri clarifies that he was referring to external dangers, not internal ones. He explains that orcs sometimes appear unexpectedly within secured perimeters, and despite their size, they are skilled at ambushing. The old man nods in agreement, adding that the orcs are cunning and far more deceptive than their appearance suggests. Yuri comments that since it's the Holy Kingdom, there probably won't be any major problems, but it's still good to stay cautious and keep that in mind. After meeting with them, Yuri leaves to explore the town with Hernando. While walking together, Hernando asks about the people of the Holy Kingdom, and Yuri explains that they're rather old-fashioned. He adds that the princess there will likely have quite a difficult time adapting. Hearing this, Hernando grins and remarks that it sounds like Yuri has taken a liking to the princess. Seeing his expression, Yuri appears a bit concerned and replies, "Well, something like that." Then, changing the topic, Yuri pulls out an artifact from his pocket and asks Hernando if he really bought it here. Hernando nods, saying this is the only place around that sells such things. Yuri then reveals that the bandit leader claimed the item lures orcs. More precisely, if orcs nearby sense the aura from this necklace, they lose control and charge toward it. As the two continue their conversation while standing in front of a merchant stall, the shopkeeper grows irritated and shouts at them to leave if they aren't planning to buy anything. Hernando turns to Yuri and says that it seems there's nothing else like this necklace left, as the bandits appear to have bought them all. Yuri sighs and replies that it's a shame. Meanwhile, elsewhere in town, Sibylla meets with her knights. The commander asks if she has finished her discussion with the Lord, and Sibylla confirms that she has. Pibek, the deputy commander of the Holy Kingdom's forces, speaks arrogantly, saying he heard that the Prince of Betrayal is a rock bottom, and mocks that for such an eccentric person to be a commander, Betrayal's reputation as a nation of knights must be long gone. Hearing this, Sibylla frowns and calmly warns Pibek that slander is unbecoming of a knight. Pibek scoffs and says it doesn't matter. He adds that his men told him Yuri's attire made him look like a common mercenary, and that his behavior was even worse than they described. With a smirk, he remarks that when this alliance mission ends, Betrayal might lose a prince. Pibek's arrogance starts to irritate Sibylla, and she firmly tells him that's enough and to watch his words. Pibek finally stops talking, but still maintains a smug attitude. Sibylla then asks if the main force is truly doing fine. Pibek responds arrogantly that everything is under control and that she doesn't need to worry. Turning away, he adds that he's managing everything himself and tells her they'll be going on a city patrol. Sibylla sighs heavily, her expression clouded with frustration. As night falls, the scene shifts to a bustling restaurant. Pibek and his knights step inside and immediately notice several soldiers chatting cheerfully at one of the tables. Curious, Pibek asks about them, and one of his men informs him that they are soldiers from Betrayal. Pibek frowns, remarking that allowing foreign soldiers into the city seems careless. He shakes his head with a displeased look, saying they clearly lack proper military discipline. The knight beside him adds arrogantly that since Betrayal's leaders act that way, it's no surprise their lower ranks follow suit. Pibek's irritation grows as he watches the Betrayal soldiers laughing and enjoying themselves. Unable to hold back, he raises his voice, demanding to know what they're doing and whether they think this is some kind of vacation. Pibek continues sternly, saying that he can't overlook such behavior, even if it involves soldiers from another nation. He questions loudly whether they take the Alliance army seriously, but before he can go any further, Yuri steps forward and calmly places a hand on Pibek's shoulder. With a composed smile, asks for his name. Pibek slaps Yuri's hand away and coldly warns him that such behavior harms not only the prince, but also the soldiers who follow him. Pibek mocks Yuri further, claiming it's not as if he has ever properly held a blade. Yuri exhales slowly, keeping his composure. He calmly reminds Pibek that he had only asked for his name, then taunts him by asking whether basic etiquette isn't taught in the Holy Kingdom. Pibek is left stunned, unable to respond. At that moment, Sibylla enters the inn and asks what is going on. Yuri turns toward her as she questions Pibek, reminding him that he was supposed to be on patrol. Pibek immediately apologizes. Sibylla orders him outside at once, and he silently obeys. After he leaves, Sibylla apologizes to Yuri on behalf of her knight. Yuri laughs lightly, telling her no apology is necessary. He understands how difficult it is to manage soldiers. Only someone at a sage's level could control them perfectly. Sibylla walks toward the door, saying she will repay the favor next time. Yuri agrees, recalling Raymond's report that Sibylla, the second princess of the Holy Kingdom, is under pressure as she falls behind in a power struggle. Now, he realizes that this must be what Raymond meant, brushing it off as no real problem. Meanwhile, Piebeck clicks his tongue and asks Sibylla whether she is close to Yuri, the third prince of Betrayal. Sibylla coolly asks if that is a problem. Piebeck grows irritated, insisting that Yuri lacks dignity. Before he can continue, a knight rushes in and urgently reports to Her Highness Sibylla, and he bows quickly before delivering the message. The main troops are under attack by orcs. Both Sibylla and Piebeck are shocked. They immediately prepare to depart. Before they leave, the elderly Lord of Gide respectfully suggests that Sibylla request assistance from Betrayal's forces. As she considers it, he explains that if she wishes to minimize casualties, it may be the only option. Piebeck angrily interrupts, declaring that the Holy Kingdom solves its own problems and questioning whether the old man believes their soldiers can be defeated by orcs. The old lord chuckles gently, clarifying that he meant no such insult. Sibylla reassures him that she understands his concern but insists they will manage. She thanks him for his consideration and orders the knights to move out. As they depart, a knight beside the old lord comments that the Holy Kingdom's knights are stubborn. The old man agrees, adding that the vice-captain is the most stubborn of all. Realizing they have no time to waste, he orders the knight to visit the third prince at Betrayal's barracks and hurry. There is little time left. The knight delivers the message to Yuri. As Yuri reads the report, Raymond asks what it says. Yuri explains that the Holy Kingdom's main troops are under attack by orcs, and that the Lord of Gide is requesting Betrayal's assistance. Raymond is surprised the request came from Gide rather than the Holy Kingdom itself. Yuri guesses that the Holy Kingdom's pride, especially Piebeck's stubbornness, prevented them from asking directly. He immediately orders Raymond to prepare for combat. Raymond accepts and leaves to make arrangements. Turning to the knight who brought the message, Yuri asks his name. The knight introduces himself as Roy. Yuri instructs Roy to gather the soldiers at the inn near the Talisman Market and inform them that the first 10 to arrive will accompany him. They will understand the situation once they are on the move. Roy salutes and departs. Yuri sets the paper down and smiles faintly before stepping out for a brief night stroll. Soon after, they set off to assist the Holy Kingdom. Roland approaches Yuri and expresses admiration for his actions. Confused, Yuri asks what he means. Roland explains that despite being insulted by the Holy Knights, Yuri forgave them and is even going out of his way to help. To Roland, that proves Yuri is not petty. He admires how Yuri sees the bigger picture, focusing on the forest, not just a single tree. Yuri smiles, denying that it is anything special. In truth, Roland was never like this in Yuri's previous life. Seeing this change feels strange to him. He thanks Roland for his loyalty, realizing that perhaps both of them have changed. When Roland waits for more, Yuri simply says he is grateful that Roland understands. It dawns on Yuri that Roland has begun to be influenced by him. Suddenly, Raymond points toward the battlefield ahead, where the Holy Kingdom's knights are already engaged in combat. Yuri's expression sharpens. He warns everyone to stay alert. This will be their first battle against orcs. Then he declares that he will be the first to enter the fight and the last to leave. As the third prince of Betrayal, Yuri commands his knights to stand strong, and not a single one of them is to fall. Moments earlier, the Holy Kingdom's knights were charging forward to rescue their main forces. As they advanced, Sibylla reflected on her own recklessness. She hadn't anticipated that the main force would be attacked. Yuri had warned her about the orcs, and now she realized she should have been more cautious. Soon, the battlefield came into view. The main force and the orcs were locked in combat, but the Holy Kingdom's flags were still flying, proof that the line had not yet fallen. Sibylla informed Piebeck that she would charge ahead and strike directly at the enemy commander. Piebeck understood immediately and ordered the knights to form up. With their banner raised high, they surged forward. Sibylla activated her incarnation, boosting her speed, but as they approached, a grim sight appeared. The moment they crossed a certain boundary, a hidden magic circle activated beneath their feet. In an instant, most of the knights collapsed into a concealed pit. "It's a trap," Sibylla shouted, but it was too late. She fell along with the others. As she hit the ground, she wondered if she had made the same mistake again. Her mind drifted back to her childhood, when she first manifested divine law. Everyone had praised her, calling her extraordinary. She still remembered the warmth in their voices. Wanting to live up to those expectations, she turned to swordsmanship as well. But the day her blade defeated her own brother, she realized it had been a forbidden choice, one she was never meant to desire. Her achievements had only deepened the pressure. People claimed it was God's will for her to serve with the Allied forces. From that moment on, her brother, feeling his claim to the throne threatened, pushed her toward the battlefield. He told her that if she fought for God, her soul would be saved and ascend to heaven. Now, lying injured at the bottom of the pit, Sibylla gave a bitter smile. In the end, they had simply wanted her gone. Some soldiers were alive but badly injured. Sibylla forced herself up and ordered the survivors to stay focused. But as she looked down, she noticed something strange. Above them, orcs surrounded the pit. Fear gripped her. What could she do? How could they possibly survive? Just as despair overtook her, a voice called her name. In a flash, Yuri appeared and took down the orc. Ropes were quickly thrown into the pit, and the trapped knights were pulled to safety. Once back on solid ground, Sibylla thanked Yuri, saying she owed him a debt. Yuri brushed it off, telling her not to mention it. Then came a surprising turn. Pibek, who had previously acted arrogant and dismissive, stepped forward and bowed deeply to Prince Yuri. He formally introduced himself and sincerely apologized for his behavior at the tavern, vowing never to forget the favor he had received today. Sibylla stared in shock at Pibek's humility. Yuri simply smiled, accepted the apology, and lightly added that next time Betrayal is in trouble, the Holy Kingdom should return the favor. Suddenly, a horn echoed across the battlefield. Yuri turned and spotted an orc blowing the signal. Drawing his sword, he informed everyone that the orcs were retreating. Their attempt to eliminate the knights had failed, so they were pulling back. With morale surging, Yuri ordered the knights to pursue and not let a single orc escape. The troops responded without hesitation. Amid the retreating enemy, Yuri noticed an orc carrying a distinctive flag. He immediately recognized it as an Orcvals, their commander. With a subtle hand gesture, Yuri signaled Sibylla to step back. The Orcvals fired an arrow straight at him. Calmly, Yuri infused his blade with mana and brake the arrow in midair. It seems their commander is quite upset, Yuri remarked. Charging his sword with mana, Yuri stepped forward, ready to respond to the provocation. After launching his counterattack, the orcs began retreating once again. With calm confidence, Yuri told Sibylla he would be right back. She stared at him in disbelief, asking if he truly intended to charge in alone. Yuri gave no reply. Instead, he dashed forward toward the fleeing orcs. Seeing him approach at full speed, several orcs stopped and attempted to counterattack. One hurled a spear straight at him. As he maintained his momentum, Yuri recalled Bernard's teachings over the past 5 years. Bernard had once explained that the battlefield is filled with countless variables: terrain, timing, distance, and the unpredictable movements of allies and enemies. The foundation of combat, he said, is expanding one's range of response through relentless training. But Yuri's soul break was different. It grasped the entire battlefield in an instant, intuitively calculating the most efficient path and shaping swordsmanship from that awareness. When Yuri once asked for a simpler explanation, Bernard had only smiled and said, "You'll understand when the moment comes. Your body will move before you think, choosing the most efficient way to take down your enemy." Now, that moment had arrived. The first spear nearly struck him, but Yuri tilted his head slightly and dodged it with ease. In the very next instant, another spear flew toward him. Without hesitation, Yuri leapt into the air, stepping off the airborne spear as if it were solid ground. Using that momentum, he closed the distance and took down the orcs in a single flowing motion. More orcs rushed him, creating a 3-on-1 situation, dangerous under normal circumstances. But it had been a long time since Yuri had stepped onto a battlefield. He welcomed the challenge, with Soul Break guiding him. He clearly saw the optimal paths and angles of attack. His blade moved like flowing water, taking down the orcs one after another. Within moments, all 3 fell. Yuri showed no sign of panic or strain. Still, he could feel that his body had yet to fully catch up to his mind. He wasn't at his peak, but for now, this would suffice. After defeating them, Yuri picked up a fallen spear and thrust it skyward, openly challenging the remaining orcs. The orcfuls, already angered by Yuri's earlier defiance, grew furious at the provocation. With full force, Yuri hurled the spear toward the orcful's commander. The orc tried to block it with crossed axes, but the sheer power behind the throw shattered the weapons and struck him down. As their commander fell wounded, panic spread through the orc ranks. Yuri had expected another charge, but it seemed they had decided further losses were not worth the risk. He let out a small laugh. That should repay the arrow from earlier. Sibylla rushed to his side, asking if he was hurt. Yuri turned to her with a reassuring smile, confirming he was fine. Looking over the battlefield, he remarked that things appeared to be under control. He then asked Sibylla what she thought of her first victory as part of an allied army. Sibylla smiled and nodded, thanking him sincerely. She admitted that they had survived thanks to him. In the distance, the remaining orcs retreated, muttering angrily among themselves in their own language as they disappeared from the battlefield. The scene shifts to the inn, where soldiers excitedly discuss how Prince Yuri stepped in to save Sibylla and the others during the clash with the orcs. Among the guests sits a purple-haired girl in a robe, quietly listening. As she overhears the conversation, she reflects on Yuri. He is far more than just a royal. Not only did he see through her carefully concealed assassination techniques, but he also walked straight into the heart of the battlefield without hesitation. To her, Yuri always seems several steps ahead. Sometimes it even feels as though he can see the future. She calls the innkeeper over and explains that she is searching for someone. The innkeeper asks what kind of person she means. The girl describes a skilled swordsman with dark brown hair who carries a blade and does not speak Continental very well. The innkeeper pauses to think. He recalls a traveler whose Continental was somewhat clumsy. That man had asked for directions to Balshard. The purple-haired girl thanks him and hands over a silver coin. After the innkeeper leaves, she murmurs to herself that Balshard is where the Orc Alliance is gathering, the same destination Prince Yuri is heading toward. Determined, she decides to move ahead and find him. After all, he is said to be one of the Continental 10 Greats, a swordsman from the east. The next day, following the battle at Jid, Yuri and his forces move swiftly toward their next destination. They set up camp multiple times along the way, but after witnessing what happened to the Holy Kingdom, their preparations are far more disciplined and thorough. Yuri remarks to Raymond that everyone has become faster after repeating the process several times. Raymond agrees, explaining that the soldiers have adapted through experience. Yuri smiles and credits it all to Raymond's hard work. He then informs Raymond that he will scout the surroundings and asks him to oversee the camp in his absence. As Yuri walks into the forest, he notices the unusual silence. Even this far out, there is no movement. That only increases the likelihood of a night attack. At that moment, he hears voices. Looking ahead, he sees two knights scolding Cory, the orc traveling with them as a translator. Without hesitation, Yuri steps forward and demands to know what they are doing away from camp. The knights are startled by his sudden appearance. With a stern tone, Yuri orders them to leave immediately. They quickly retreat. Yuri turns to Cory and asks if he is all right. Cory assures him that he is fine and thanks him. Yuri then asks whether he should punish the knights. Cory shakes his head. He explains that most people still hate orcs. If Yuri protects him too openly, it might make things easier in the short term, but it would push his dream even further away. Curious, Yuri asks about that dream. Cory answers that he wants to be accepted by others and live alongside them. Yuri reflects that it is a difficult dream. For now, under the title of Orc Language Interpreter, Cory can remain among the soldiers. But once the orc subjugation campaign ends, his position may disappear. Yuri suggests that Cory learn magic from Hernando. To live among people, he will need a skill that proves his value beyond translation. Later that evening, Yuri gathers his commanders for a meeting at camp. He asks how preparations for a potential night raid are progressing. Raymond reports that all supply areas are secured and guards are stationed around the perimeter. Gerald questions whether such extensive measures are necessary, noting that they have assigned more personnel than usual. Yuri explains that they are deep in orc territory. Nothing here should be considered unlikely. Given what happened to the Holy Kingdom, there is a high chance the orcs will attempt another fire-based attack. Suddenly, a worried knight rushes into the meeting and reports that the camp is under attack. Everyone bolts outside, surveying the chaos. Yuri grimly observes that the situation is worse than expected. An explosion erupts behind them. Confused, Yuri asks what is happening. Hernando quickly replies that the orcs are using sorcery. The mana in the air is distorted. Yuri immediately asks for a countermeasure. Hernando explains that since the orcs have already activated their sorcery, the only solution is to eliminate the ones casting it. Without delay, Yuri orders Raymond and Gerald to split up and take command of their respective units. As for himself, he announces that he will personally pay a visit to the orc sorcerers. Yuri immediately asks Hernando to pinpoint the direction of the incoming spell. Hernando gestures toward a distant section of the battlefield. Without hesitation, Yuri charges straight ahead. As he advances, he spots the orc sorcerer, but before he can land a decisive strike, a towering figure steps in to intercept him. Yuri swings his blade, only for the orc leader to block the attack with his weapon. The impact is heavy, and the counterforce pushes Yuri back several steps. In that brief exchange, Yuri realizes something important. The orc leader's strength is extraordinary, and his movements are refined and efficient. This is no ordinary warrior. This orc has significant combat experience. Yuri widens the distance between them. In the next instant, the orc leader, Orkful, lunges forward. Yuri narrowly dodges the strike. Orkful continues pressing the attack, each blow powerful and relentless. Yuri deflects another strike and forces Orkful back, silently admitting that his opponent is formidable. But Yuri does not hesitate. He surges forward and retaliates, only for Orkful to counter once more. Yuri evades the follow-up strike and quickly notices something alarming. Orkful is using the mana method. Yuri realizes he should have anticipated this. If the orcs are capable of casting spells through incantations, then it stands to reason that among them would be warriors who have mastered mana techniques as well. Releasing his aura, Yuri acknowledges that Orkful must be one of the elite. Activating his skill, Yuri searches for weaknesses in Orkful's defense. He finds an opening and strikes toward a vulnerable point. But to his surprise, Orkful instantly concentrates mana around his neck, minimizing the damage. In the same motion, the orc retaliates and manages to land a solid hit on Yuri. Yuri steadies himself. He understands now, half measures will not work against an opponent like this. Both warriors ignite their auras and charge at each other simultaneously. When their weapons collide, the impact triggers a violent explosion that sends dust and debris into the air. As the smoke clears, the outcome becomes clear. Yuri stands victorious. Orkful lies on the ground, severely injured but still alive. At that moment, several knights rush to Yuri's side, asking if he is all right. Yuri calmly confirms that he is fine and immediately asks about the camp's condition. A knight reports that the situation is nearly under control. Yuri nods and issues his next command: capture all surviving orcs, including Orkful. They will begin interrogations at once. The scene shifts back to the camp, where Hernando is carefully using healing magic to treat Yuri's injuries. Once the treatment is complete, Yuri prepares to step forward, but Hernando quickly stops him. With visible pride, Hernando presents a specially crafted throne-like chair and insists that Yuri sit on it while conducting the interrogation. Surprised, Yuri asks where he managed to get such a thing. Hernando proudly explains that he requested one of the woodworking soldiers to build it. Amused by Hernando's sincerity, Yuri decides to humor him and takes a seat on the makeshift throne. The interrogation begins. Yuri orders the knights to bring the captured orcs forward one by one. Calm but firm, he announces that each of them will have only one chance to answer his question. He asks who ordered the night raid. One of the orcs shouts angrily in response. Corey steps forward to translate, but Yuri stops him, saying he understands enough. Without further delay, Yuri instructs Gerald to take that orc away. I will only ask once, Yuri says evenly. Brief and concise. Another orc speaks up in his own language. This time, Yuri turns to Corey for clarification. Corey explains that the orc claims they are low-ranking and do not know much. However, since Orkful gave the order, he is asking to be spared. Yuri replies that he can appreciate the attempt at cooperation. Soon, Orkful is brought forward. Yuri asks directly, was this the order of Orkua? The knights exchange confused looks. It is their first time hearing that name. Internally, Yuri reflects on who Orkua truly is, the king of the orcs. In his previous life, Orkua led the forces that devastated Allied knights. In this war, Orkua is a target that must eventually be eliminated. Corey translates Orkvul's response. He wants to know if he will be spared in exchange for answering. Yuri answers yes. Orkvul then requests a pledge. Yuri is briefly surprised, but nods. He remarks that breaking a pledge after making it would mean casting aside one's honor. It seems Orkvul has fought humans often enough to understand such customs. Yuri agrees to the pledge. Gerald, however, is startled and questions Yuri's intention to release the orc. Yuri calmly tells him to remain composed. He repeats the question, was it Orkua's command? Corey translates Orkvul's reply. Yes, more precisely, his chief issued the order in accordance with Orkua's command. Yuri then asks how the orcs learned the Allied forces' routes. Corey explains that Orkua possesses a method to gather such intelligence, though Orkvul does not know the details. Gerald frowns. So this Orkua figured out our routes and ordered the ambush. Yuri nods. That same method must have been used in the ambush against the Holy Kingdom. Finally, Yuri asks one last question. How powerful is Orkua? Orkvul smirks and shouts confidently in his language. Corey translates. Even if multiple orc chiefs attacked Orkua together, they would not be able to defeat him. According to Orkvul, Orkua is far more powerful than any other being in the world. Yuri responds calmly that such confidence is expected. However, he adds that humans possess something equally formidable, intelligence. Then Yuri produces a necklace adorned with a red stone. The moment Orkvul sees it, he flies into a rage. Breaking through his restraints, he lunges toward Yuri in a berserk frenzy. Yuri remains unmoved. With a single command, he orders his knights to stop him. Instantly, swords are drawn and pointed at Orkvul from every direction, halting his advance. Yuri then gives the final order to subdue Orkvul completely. Later that night at the camp, the Betrayal priest Germain is seen tending to the wounded knights. Beside him, Hernando continues casting healing magic, supporting the effort. Corey assists by carrying water for the injured. Germain casts a spell over the water, and it begins to shimmer with aura. He instructs Corey to use it to clean the wounds, explaining that the blessed water will help wash away any poison. As Germain moves from one knight to another, his healing magic rapidly and stabilizes the wounded. Watching closely, Corey is amazed by Germain's skill. For him, this is what true magic looks like, something that saves lives. The sight fills him with excitement and admiration. The next morning, Germain and Hernando sit together with Corey, visibly exhausted from working through the night. Hernando remarks that the situation is finally under control. Germain thanks him sincerely for his assistance, and Hernando adds that Corey worked hard as well. Corey shyly insists that he did very little, but Germain replies that it is fortunate the damage was limited. Hernando, however, notes that the true battle has not even begun yet. Germain quietly agrees that far more tragic events may lie ahead. Still, Hernando offers a different perspective. He says the process will not consist of tragedy alone. Even after such a dangerous night, the knights continue helping one another. The magic he and Germain use merely lends a small amount of strength. The real resilience comes from the soldiers themselves. Moved by what he witnessed, Corey asks Hernando to teach him magic. Hernando pauses, surprised. It has been a long time since someone made such a request. He asks Corey why he wants to learn. Corey answers that Lord Yuri recommended it, and that magic makes people smile. He wants to do the same. Hernando smiles and says that a half-orc who uses magic would truly be something remarkable. The following morning, a knight reports to Yuri that Imperial forces have arrived. Gerald asks whether Yuri plans to meet them. Yuri replies that of course he will. With Balsad just ahead, their arrival cannot be a coincidence. Soon after, Rapio Artem, the second son of Count Xenon, steps forward and greets Yuri on behalf of the Imperial Knights. Yuri welcomes him and asks whether the Empire reached Balsad first. Artem confirms that they are serving as the vanguard. Orcs have been sighted near Balsad, and they are currently informing nearby Allied units. Yuri's gaze then shifts to another man standing nearby. He asks about him. The man apologizes for not introducing himself earlier. He states that his name is Graham Hartfall, formerly a knight, and pays his respects to the third prince of Betrayal. Yuri smiles faintly, thinking to himself that fate has brought them together once more, a reminder of a past he would rather forget. Aloud, Yuri greets him politely and says it is a pleasure to meet him, Sir Graham. Graham immediately asks Yuri not to address him that way, explaining that he is no longer a knight. Yuri inquires whether he lost his title and is now serving as a common soldier. Graham confirms that this is the case. Artem steps in, stating that Graham did nothing wrong. If there was any fault, it was merely that he served under the wrong superior. Graham attempts to stop him, but Artem continues, saying it is the truth. Few knights ever held a reputation as honorable as Sir Graham's. Yuri reflects silently. At one point, for reasons tied to imperial politics, Graham was stripped of his knighthood. Yuri never expected to encounter him again among the Allied forces. The man who once embodied the very definition of a knight now questions his own worth. With a calm smile, Yuri says he has heard much about Graham and considers it an honor to meet him like this. Then, without hesitation, Yuri asks him a surprising question. Why not come to Betrayal instead? Yuri may not think highly of the Imperial Knights as a whole, but Graham is different. In his past life, Graham spared Yuri's life. Whatever consequences followed, Graham bore them alone. Because of that, Yuri cannot treat him the same way he treats the others. Yuri tells Graham that if he ever chooses to come to Betrayal, he will be welcomed and treated with the respect he deserves. Graham responds with a gentle smile and apologizes, declining the offer. Yuri nods, saying he understands and respects his decision. The scene then shifts to Balsad, the gathering place of the Allied forces. As they arrive, Yuri remarks that the Dukes of Balsad have traditionally been mages. Hernando confirms this, explaining that the Anter family has produced exceptional mages for generations. However, he quietly advises Yuri not to lower his guard in front of the Archmage Duke. Soon, they enter the ceremonial hall, where they are greeted by the Duke of Balsad, Mary Rose Anter. Yuri and Mary Rose take their seats and exchange introductions. Mary Rose smiles and comments that Yuri is as handsome as she had heard. She then asks his age. Yuri replies that he is 18. Mary Rose brightens and says they are the same age, which means they should get along well. Yuri responds politely but cautiously. Outwardly, she seems charming, but for Yuri, she stirs memories that are far from pleasant. Despite her friendly demeanor, he cannot view her without reservation. Still, Yuri remarks that if their intentions align, they can become friends, regardless of status. At that, Mary Rose rises and addresses everyone in the hall. She announces that the Prince and Knights of Betrayal have arrived, and from this point forward, they will fight together against a common enemy. Since they are now allies, she suggests they take time to get to know one another. Gerald quietly asks why the Archmage Duke is suddenly acting so sociable. Hernando replies that it is simply her personality. She is naturally outgoing. Moments later, Jonathan, the commander of Bruzen, approaches Yuri to greet him. Yuri glances at the food provided and remarks that the food is impressive, noting that it is good to see Bruzen's forces making such an effort. One of Bruzen's soldiers bristles at the comment and demands to know if Yuri is looking down on them. Jonathan quickly signals his soldier to stand down and calmly asks Yuri whether his words are meant as an insult. Yuri replies coolly, asking what Jonathan would do if they were. Does he expect an apology? Jonathan answers that no apology is necessary. He explains that he sees the situation in two possible ways. First, that the third Prince of Betrayal is as delinquent as rumors claim. Second, that before the Allied forces fully unite, Yuri is testing Bruzen's strength. Yuri stands and states plainly that there is nothing more dangerous on a battlefield than an ally who cannot be trusted. He then asks whether Bruzen's forces can prove themselves. Jonathan accepts without hesitation. A knight proves his worth with his sword. With an amused smile, Mary Rose offers to guide them to the training grounds. The scene shifts to the training field, where Mary Rose, Yuri, and Jonathan sit together while their knights prepare to spar. Mary Rose leans toward Yuri and asks if he truly picked that confrontation on purpose. Yuri tells her not to pretend innocence. She was the one who set the stage. Mary Rose laughs lightly, replying that he stepped into it as though he had been waiting for the opportunity. Internally, Yuri reflects that testing Bruzen's strength is important, but there is another reason for this match. Someday, one of these knights may inherit a title reserved for the continent's strongest, like his father among the 10 greats. It would not hurt to assess their potential now. On the field, the knights step forward and exchange greetings. Freund of Bruzen faces off against Laurent of Betrayal. As the duel begins, Yuri watches closely. Today, he intends to learn everything he can.